The sun hadn't yet burned away the morning frost when Rafael Cortez first noticed the dust cloud on the eastern road. He was mending the fence line near the cottonwood grove, the same fence he'd rebuilt 3 times in as many years, when he saw it, a thin ribbon of brown rising against the pale sky like smoke from a dying fire. Elena would have told him he worried too much. She would have laughed that soft laugh of hers, the one that made the hardness of frontier life seem almost bearable, and reminded him that riders pass through their land all the time. Traders, drifters, families heading west with dreams bigger than their wagons. But Raphael had learned long ago that a man who didn't worry on the frontier was a man who didn't last. He straightened slowly, his back protesting the movement. 42 years old, and already he felt ancient. The ranch did that to you, carved years into your bones with every drought, every winter, every season that tested whether you were strong enough to deserve the land you claimed. Papa! The voice belonged to Miguel, his eldest. 14 years old and already taller than his mother, the boy came running from the barn with that awkward, coltish gait of youth not yet settled into its full height. His face was flushed with excitement. "Riders coming," Miguel panted, pointing unnecessarily toward the dust cloud. 6, maybe 7 horses, moving slow. Raphael nodded, keeping his expression neutral, even as his gut tightened. "Get your brother and sister inside. Tell your mama we might have visitors." "But Papa, I can—" "Now, Miguel." The boy's face fell, but he obeyed. That was one thing Raphael had done right with his children. They understood that when his voice took on that particular edge, discussion was over. He watched Miguel sprint toward the house, a sturdy adobe structure that Raphael had built with his own hands 15 years ago, before Miguel was born, before little Carmen came screaming into the world, before Tomas learned to walk, before everything. The dust cloud grew larger. Raphael walked back to the house with measured steps, refusing to rush, refusing to show the anxiety that coiled in his chest like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. He passed the well, the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden that Elena tended with the devotion some women reserve for prayer. Everything they had built together. Every board, every stone, every fence post driven into this unforgiving earth represented years of sweat and determination. Elena met him at the door. She was wiping her hands on her apron, flour dusting her forearms. Bread-making day. The normalcy of it struck him as almost absurd given the tension crawling up his spine. "How many?" she asked quietly. She knew him well enough to read the concern he tried to hide. 6 or 7. Could be nothing. Could be. But her eyes told him she didn't believe it any more than he did. The frontier had its own language, and they had both learned to read its signs. Riders moving in groups that size, moving slowly, coming from the east where the territorial disputes had grown uglier in recent months. That combination rarely spelled good news. "I want you to take the children to the root cellar," Raphael said, keeping his voice low, "just as a precaution." "Raphael." "Please, Elena." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. They had been married 17 years. They had survived failed crops and killing winters and a fever that had nearly taken Carmen when she was just 3 years old. Their partnership was built on trust, and if Raphael said the root cellar, then the root cellar it would be. The riders materialized from the heat shimmer like ghosts taking solid form. 7 men, as Miguel had guessed. They rode with the casual confidence of people who owned whatever ground their horses' hooves touched. Their clothes were dust-covered but well-made, their horses too fine for common drifters. And every man wore a gun belt with the easy familiarity of those who knew how to use what hung from their hips. Raphael stood in front of his house, his own ancient rifle held loosely but ready. It was a statement without being a threat, a frontier courtesy that said, "I welcome conversation, but I'm prepared for alternatives." The riders stopped about 30 feet from the house. Their leader, a man with a thick black mustache and eyes like chips of flint, swung down from his saddle with fluid grace. He was perhaps 35, maybe 40, built like a bull and moving with the contained violence of a man who had killed before and would kill again. "Good morning, friend." The man's voice was surprisingly pleasant, almost jovial. "Beautiful land you have here." "Morning," Raphael replied, his tone neutral. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" "Actually, yes." The man smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. We've been riding since yesterday afternoon. Our water's running low, and we could use a place to rest our horses. Maybe fill our bellies if you've got anything to spare." It was a reasonable request. Frontier hospitality wasn't just tradition, it was survival. You help travelers because someday you might be the traveler needing help. But something about these men made Raphael's instincts scream warnings. "Got a well in a barn," Raphael said slowly. "You're welcome to water your horses. My wife's making bread. I can spare some, and there's salt pork if you're hungry." "Generous of you." The man's smile widened. "Name's Vega, Antonio Vega. These are my associates." He didn't introduce the others, and Raphael didn't ask. Names were sometimes better left unknown on the frontier. Rafael Cortez. "This is my land, my home. You're welcome to rest, but I'd appreciate if you'd be on your way by nightfall." Something flickered in Vega's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or irritation at the implicit dismissal, but he nodded agreeably. "Of course. We wouldn't dream of imposing." Raphael showed them to the well and the barn, every nerve ending alert for trouble. The men moved through his property with a familiarity that suggested they were used to taking inventory of other people's belongings. One of them, a thin man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw, spent too long examining the horse stalls. Another kept glancing toward the house with an expression Raphael didn't like. Elena brought out bread and salt pork, her face carefully composed but her movements stiff with tension. She had dressed Carmen in her Sunday dress, a small gesture of formality that was also a reminder that this was a family home, that civilized rules applied here. "Beautiful family," Vega said, accepting the bread with a nod. His eyes lingered on Elena just a fraction too long. "You're lucky, Cortez. A man with a good wife and healthy children is rich beyond measure." "I know it," Raphael replied quietly. They ate in relative silence, the visitors making short work of the bread and pork. Raphael watched them carefully, cataloging details. The way the scarred man's hand never strayed far from his gun. The nervous habit one of the younger riders had of cracking his knuckles. The fact that Vega sat with his back to the barn, but positioned so he could see both the house and the road. These were not simple travelers. These were men who lived by violence, resting only in the gaps between acts of brutality. "You hear about the troubles in San Marco?" Vega asked conversationally, picking meat from his teeth with a fingernail. San Marco was 3 days' ride to the south. Raphael had heard rumors, whispers about a new faction moving into the territory, consolidating power, making examples of anyone who resisted. "I heard something," Raphael admitted. "The Mendoza brothers." Vega said the name like he was discussing the weather. "They're bringing order to the region, structure. Most of the ranchers down that way have seen the wisdom of cooperation." "That's so." "It is." Vega's eyes fixed on Raphael with sudden intensity. "Times are changing, Cortez. The frontier's not what it used to be. Can't just claim land and expect to keep it through stubbornness anymore. Need friends, need protection." Raphael felt the conversation's true nature reveal itself like a snake shedding its skin. This wasn't about water or rest. This was a recruitment visit. Or maybe an assessment. "I appreciate the information," Raphael said carefully. "But I'm not looking for friends or protection. Just want to work my land and raise my family in peace." "Peace." The Vega repeated the word like it was foreign. "Peace is expensive, friend. Especially out here where the law's more suggestion than rule." "I'll take my chances." The temperature of the conversation dropped 10 degrees. Vega's pleasant expression didn't change, but something cold and reptilian moved behind his eyes. "Of course you will," he said softly. "Of course." The afternoon dragged on like a wound refusing to clot. The visitors showed no signs of leaving despite Raphael's pointed comments about their long journey ahead. They lounged in the shade of the barn, talking among themselves in low voices, occasionally laughing at jokes Raphael couldn't hear but suspected were at his expense. Miguel appeared at his elbow just after noon, his young face tight with anger. "They're still here," the boy hissed. "Papa, I don't like them. The way they look at Mama, at Carmen." "I know." Raphael put a hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the tension in the young muscles beneath his palm. Go back to the cellar. Stay with your mother and the others. No matter what you hear, you stay put until I come for you, understand? But, Miguel, Rafael turned to face his son fully. I need you to be a man right now. I need you to protect your mother and your brother and sister. Can you do that for me? The boy swallowed hard, then nodded. Rafael watched him go, a terrible premonition settling over him like a burial shroud. Sunset painted the sky in shades of blood and copper. Vega and his men made no move to saddle their horses. Instead, they built a fire in front of Rafael's barn, not asking permission, simply taking what they wanted. Rafael approached them as the first stars emerged, his rifle once again in his hands. Gentlemen, I appreciated your company, but it's time you moved on. Vega looked up from the fire, his face devil-masked in the dancing light. Actually, Cortez, we've been talking. This is good land. Water, grazing, strategic position. The Mendoza brothers, they're always looking for good land. Might be they'd be interested in acquiring this property. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Vega stood slowly. Just a matter of finding the right price. Not this. Not my home. The scarred man laughed, a sound like bones breaking. Your home? You think scratching around in the dirt for 15 years gives you ownership? This land belonged to the Comanche before you, belonged to the Spanish before them. Only thing that matters is who's strong enough to hold it. Rafael's finger moved closer to the trigger. I'm strong enough. Are you? Vega took a step forward. You're one man, Cortez. One old rancher with an old rifle and delusions of independence. We're 7. And we're just the beginning. The Mendoza organization stretches from here to the capital. They have 50 men, maybe 100, judges in their pockets, sheriffs who look the other way. You think you can stand against that? I think I can stand against you. The words hung in the air between them, sharp as drawn steel. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vega smiled. A genuine smile this time, pleased and anticipatory. Wrong answer, friend. It happened faster than thought. The scarred man went for his gun, and Rafael shot him through the chest before the weapon cleared leather. The man went down hard, blood black in the firelight. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions. Rafael dove behind a water trough, splinters exploding from the wood as bullets chewed into it. He fired twice more, saw another man stumble and fall, but there were too many of them, and they were spreading out, flanking him, professional in their violence. A bullet caught him in the left shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, tasting dirt and copper. Through the haze of pain, he saw Vega walking toward him, gun drawn, face composed. Could have been easy, Vega said, almost sadly. Could have taken the offer, worked for the Mendozas, kept your family safe. But you had to be proud. Had to be stubborn. Rafael tried to raise his rifle, but his arm wouldn't cooperate. Blood soaked his shirt, warm and wet. Where's your family, Cortez? Vega looked toward the house. Wife? Kids? They hiding? Leave them alone, Rafael gasped. This is between us. No. Vega shook his head. This stopped being between us the moment you pulled that trigger. This is about sending a message now, about making sure every other stubborn rancher in this territory understands what happens when you refuse the Mendoza brothers. He raised his voice. Burn the house! Find the family! No! Rafael lunged forward, desperately trying to reach Vega, but another bullet took him in the leg. He went down again, consciousness wavering. Through the growing darkness at the edges of his vision, he saw his house, his beautiful adobe house that he'd built with his own hands, beginning to burn. Orange flames licked at the windows, smoke poured from the door, and then he heard the screaming. Elena. Carmen. The sounds drove into his brain like railroad spikes. He tried to crawl toward the house, leaving a trail of blood in the dirt, but rough hands grabbed him and dragged him back. No, no, Vega said, kneeling beside him. You're going to watch this, Cortez. You're going to see what your pride cost you. They dragged his family from the burning house. Elena fought like a wildcat, scratching and biting. Miguel tried to shield his younger siblings, his young face transformed by terror into something ancient and knowing. Carmen was crying, and little Tomas, only 6 years old, was calling for his papa. Raphael screamed. He screamed until his throat was raw, until blood flecked his lips, until the world itself seemed to crack under the weight of his anguish. But the hands holding him were iron, and all he could do was watch as Vega's men lined his family against the barn wall. "This is mercy," Vega told him quietly. "We could do worse. We could make it last. But I'm not a monster, Cortez. I'm just a businessman. This is just business." The gunshots came one after another, after another, after another. Each one was a piece of Raphael's soul tearing away. Each one a lifetime of love and hope and dreams turning to ash. Elena fell first, her body crumpling like paper. Miguel tried to run and made it 3 steps before bullets cut him down. Carmen and Tomas didn't even scream. They just stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the screaming. It was the silence of a world emptied of meaning, of a universe that had revealed itself to be nothing but cruelty and darkness. "Burn it all," Vega ordered. Vega. "Barn, house, everything. Leave nothing but ashes." He turned back to Raphael, who had stopped struggling, stopped screaming, stopped being anything but an empty shell around an infinite void of grief. "We're leaving you alive," Vega said, "so you can tell others what happens when they refuse. So you can carry this story to every rancher, every homesteader, every stubborn fool who thinks he can stand against the tide. The Mendoza brothers own this territory now, and resistance has a price." They shot him twice more, once in the gut, once in the ribs, casual, almost careless violence. Then they mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Raphael bleeding in the dirt as his world burned around him. He should have died. Any rational assessment of his injuries said death was the only possible outcome. But something in him refused to let go. Some core of rage and pain that wouldn't permit him the mercy of extinction. He lay in the dirt for hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, watching his home collapse into embers, the bodies of his family, dark shapes against the firelight. Dawn came eventually, as it always did. The sun rose on a landscape of destruction. The house was gone. The barn was gone. His family was gone. Everything he had built, everything he had loved, reduced to ashes and memory. Rafael Cortez dragged himself across the scorched earth, leaving a trail of blood that looked black in the morning light. He didn't know where he was going, didn't know why he was moving. His body was a collection of screaming wounds, each breath an agony, each movement a small death. But he moved anyway. He reached Elena first. She lay on her side, her eyes open and empty, staring at nothing. Blood had pooled beneath her, soaked into the earth that she had tended with such care. He tried to close her eyes, but his hands shook too badly. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, feeling the coldness of her skin, and wept dry tears because his body had no moisture left to spare. Miguel lay sprawled face down, his young body broken. Raphael turned him over gently, seeing the boy he had taught to ride, to shoot, to read the land. The man his son would never become. Carmen and Tomas had died clutching each other. Someone, maybe Elena in her final moments, maybe Miguel, had put them together, and they had faced the end holding hands. Carmen's Sunday dress was scorched and torn. Tomas's favorite toy, a wooden horse Raphael had carved for his 4th birthday, lay beside him in the dust. Raphael gathered them to him, all of them, pulling their bodies close despite the screaming protests of his wounds. He held his family in his arms as the sun climbed higher and the buzzards began to circle overhead. He held them and whispered apologies and promises and prayers to gods he no longer believed could exist in a world this cruel. Time lost meaning. The sun crossed the sky and began its descent toward the western horizon. Raphael knew he should bury them, knew he should do something, but the thought of releasing them, of putting them in the cold ground, was unbearable. Finally, as shadows lengthened and the day bled toward evening, he forced himself to move. Using a broken fence post as a cane, he dragged himself to the ruins of his barn. The tool shed had somehow survived the fire, and inside he found a shovel with a cracked handle. It took him until midnight to dig the graves. Each shovelful of earth was agony, reopening wounds, driving pain through his body like lightning. But he kept digging, kept moving, because this was the last thing he could do for them, the last act of love in a world that had become loveless. He buried Elena in her favorite spot, beneath the cottonwood grove where she used to sit in the evenings and watch the sun set. Miguel went beside her, his mother's son, protective even in death. Carmen and Tomas he laid together in a single grave, still holding hands, letting them comfort each other in whatever darkness lay beyond. There were no words. Rafael had no prayers left, no faith in anything but the reality of loss. He simply stood over the graves as the moon rose, his body swaying with exhaustion and blood loss, and tried to remember how to breathe. When he finally turned away from the burial mounds, something had changed in him. The Rafael Cortez who had offered hospitality to strangers, who had believed in frontier codes and human decency, who had thought goodness and hard work would protect what he loved, that man was dead, buried alongside his family. What rose in his place was something else, something forged in grief and tempered in hatred, something that understood the world's true language wasn't negotiation or mercy or law. It was violence, pure, remorseless violence. He looked to the east, toward the direction Vega and his men had ridden, toward San Marco and the Mendoza brothers and the empire built on fear and blood, toward the people who had destroyed his world and expected him to simply accept it, to become a warning to others, to live out his days as a broken thing carrying their message of power. They had made one mistake, one fatal, irreversible mistake. They had left him alive. Rafael Cortez stumbled into the ruins of his house and found his father's old saddlebag, miraculously untouched by the flames. He packed it with what little remained: some dried meat the fire had missed, a canteen, the ammunition from his rifle. His hands moved with mechanical precision, his mind already far away, focused on a singular purpose with the intensity of religious devotion. The horse pasture had survived. 2 of his 3 horses remained, spooked and nervous, but alive. He saddled the stronger of the 2, a gray gelding named Storm, moving slowly, his wounds screaming with every motion. Blood soaked through his makeshift bandages, and he knew he should rest, should tend his injuries properly, should give himself time to heal. But time was a luxury for people with futures. Rafael had no future. He had only a past to avenge and a present to survive long enough to achieve it. As the first light of his second dawn without a family broke across the devastated ranch, Rafael Cortez pulled himself onto Storm's back. The movement sent white-hot pain through his body, and for a moment the world grayed out completely. But he gripped the saddle horn, forced air into his lungs, and stayed upright through sheer force of will. He looked back one final time at the burial mounds, at the blackened ruins of his home, at the life that had been stolen from him. Something inside his chest, the place where his heart used to be, had become a void filled with a single, burning purpose. Vega had said the Mendoza brothers owned this territory, had said resistance had a price, had said this was just business. Rafael Cortez was about to teach them a new truth. He was about to show them what happened when business became personal, when mercy died and vengeance was born, when you left a man alive who had absolutely nothing left to lose. He turned Storm toward the east, toward San Marco, toward the long road that led to the people who had destroyed his world. His wounds throbbed with every step the horse took. His vision swam with pain and exhaustion. Any sensible assessment said he'd be dead within days. But Rafael wasn't interested in being sensible anymore. He was interested in seeing Vega's eyes when recognition dawned, in watching the Mendoza brothers realize that the message they'd tried to send had created something they couldn't control, in making them understand that some prices are paid in blood, and the account they'd opened would be settled in full. Storm carried him into the wasteland, into the harsh beauty of the frontier that had always demanded everything and given back only what you could force from its grip. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of morning cool. Behind him, the smoke from his ruined life faded into the distance. Ahead lay only the desert, the unknown, and the promise of reckoning. Rafael Cortez rode toward it all with the single-minded focus of a man who had become death itself. They had wanted to send a message. He would deliver one in return, written in the language they understood best, not with words, but with graves. The frontier would remember what happened when you pushed a peaceful man past the point of return, when you turned love into hate, hope into fury, mercy into merciless retribution. They had created this. Now they would face it. And nothing, not distance, not injury, not the vast machinery of their criminal empire, would stop what was coming. The dead demanded it, and Rafael Cortez had become their instrument. The desert didn't care about vengeance. It didn't care about grief or rage or the burning need for justice that drove Rafael Cortez deeper into its merciless embrace. The desert only cared about survival, and it tested every living thing that entered its domain with the same indifferent brutality. By the third day, Rafael's wounds had begun to fester. The bullet in his gut had passed through cleanly, a small mercy in a world that had stopped offering them. But the one in his shoulder remained lodged deep, grinding against bone with every movement. Infection bloomed hot and angry beneath his skin, turning his blood to poison. Fever came and went in waves, painting the world in strange colors, making the horizon shimmer and dance like something alive. Storm plodded forward with patient determination, following the eastern road toward San Marco without complaint. The horse seemed to understand that his rider was in no condition to make decisions, so he simply kept moving, stopping occasionally at the scattered waterholes that dotted this forsaken landscape. Rafael drifted between consciousness and delirium. In his lucid moments, he rationed the dried meat, forced water down his throat, and checked Storm's hooves for damage. In the fever dreams, Elena walked beside him, her hand cool on his burning forehead, telling him to let go, to rest, to join them. But behind her stood Miguel, his young face hard with determination, saying, "No, Papa, not yet, not until it's finished." On the fourth morning, Rafael woke to find Storm standing over him. He had no memory of dismounting, no recollection of how he'd ended up sprawled in the dust beside a dead mesquite tree. The sun was already high, beating down with hammer force. His canteen was empty, his lips were cracked and bleeding. The wound in his shoulder screamed agony with every heartbeat. He should have died there, would have died there, if not for the sound of wagon wheels grinding across packed earth. Rafael's hand went instinctively to his rifle, but the movement sent such a spike of pain through his shoulder that his vision went white. When it cleared, a wagon had stopped 20 feet away. An old man with skin like dried leather was climbing down, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose bones had seen too many hard years. "You look like death took a bite and spit you back out," the old man observed, approaching with cautious respect for Rafael's weapon. "Name's Dutch. Dutch Kearney. That's my granddaughter Sarah up in the wagon." Rafael tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Only a rasping croak emerged. Dutch knelt beside him, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Sarah, bring water." A young woman appeared, maybe 20 years old, with her grandfather's same leather-tough resilience written in her sun-browned features. She carried a canteen and moved without hesitation, kneeling on Rafael's other side and lifting his head gently. "Slowly," she murmured, as cool water touched his lips. "Not too fast, or you'll just bring it back up." Rafael drank in small sips, feeling the water spread through his body like liquid life. When he could finally speak, his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." Dutch was examining his wounds with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen plenty of gunshot injuries. "You got at least one bullet still in there. Infection's bad. You need a doctor, friend." "No doctor." Rafael's hand tightened on his rifle. "No towns, just water, supplies. Then I keep moving." "Moving where? You're half dead already." "San Marco." Something shifted in Dutch's expression. Sarah's hands, which had been unwrapping the filthy bandages on Rafael's shoulder, went still. "San Marco," Dutch repeated slowly. "That's Mendoza territory." "You got business there?" "I got business." The old man studied him for a long moment, taking in the bullet wounds, the fever-bright eyes, the rifle held with desperate strength. Whatever he saw made him nod slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "Sarah, get the medical kit, and the whiskey." "Granddad, do it, girl." Sarah obeyed, though her eyes kept darting to Rafael with mingled curiosity and concern. Dutch settled himself more comfortably in the dust, his own ancient Colt revolver resting casually on his thigh. Not threatening, but available. "I'm guessing the Mendozas are the business you mentioned," Dutch said quietly. "I'm also guessing it's the permanent kind of business." Rafael said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "Thought so." Dutch pulled out a tobacco pouch and began rolling a cigarette with fingers that barely trembled despite their age. You know what you're riding into? The Mendoza brothers got 50 men, maybe more. They own San Marco top to bottom. Sheriff, mayor, every business that matters. They control the water rights, the mining operations, the trade routes. You can't spit in that town without paying them a tax on your saliva. I know. And you're going anyway. One man, shot to pieces, riding into that hornet's nest. Dutch lit his cigarette and drew deep. You mind me asking what they did to deserve that kind of dedicated stupidity? The question hung in the air between them. Raphael closed his eyes, seeing again the flames, hearing again the screams. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emptied of everything but the terrible simplicity of fact. They killed my family, my wife, my children, burned my home, left me alive to spread their message about the price of resistance. Dutch's cigarette paused halfway to his lips. Sarah, returning with the medical supplies, stopped dead in her tracks. Sweet mercy, Dutch breathed. There is no mercy, Raphael said. Not anymore. Sarah set down the medical kit with shaking hands. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, the tears Raphael himself could no longer cry. Who did it? She asked. Which men? Antonio Vega led them. 6 others. They work for the Mendozas. Dutch and Sarah exchanged a glance laden with meaning Raphael couldn't quite read. Then Sarah began working on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle despite the brutal efficiency of her movements. This is going to hurt, she warned. Everything hurts. She poured whiskey over the wound first, and Raphael's back arched as liquid fire burned through infected tissue. Then she took a thin knife, heated the blade over a match, and began to dig for the bullet. Raphael bit down on a leather strap Dutch offered, tasting copper and old sweat, focusing on anything except the sensation of metal scraping against bone. Got it, Sarah said finally, holding up a misshapen piece of lead. Infection's bad, though. You need rest and proper care, or this'll kill you just as sure as any bullet. Can't rest. Have to keep moving. To die in San Marco instead of here? Dutch shook his head. That's not revenge, son. That's just suicide with extra steps. Raphael met the old man's eyes. Then it's suicide, but I'll take some of them with me. How many? All of them. The absolute certainty in Raphael's voice made Dutch lean back slightly, reassessing. He took another drag on his cigarette, studying the broken man before him with newfound respect, tinged with something like sadness. You ever heard the story of how the Mendoza brothers came to power? Dutch asked after a moment. Raphael shook his head slightly, conserving strength. 10 years ago, this whole territory was wild but relatively peaceful. Small ranchers, miners, families trying to make an honest living. Then Alejandro and Carlos Mendoza rode in from Mexico with 20 hard men and a wagon full of gold nobody asked questions about. They bought the saloon in San Marco first, then the general store, then the bank. Within 2 years, they owned the whole town. Anyone who resisted... Dutch paused, his face darkening. Well, they learned the same lesson you did. Then I'll be one more lesson, Raphael said, but it'll be the last one they teach. Sarah finished bandaging his shoulder with clean cloth from their wagon. You need food, real food, not jerky, and at least a few days of rest. I've been resting, 4 days now. You've been dying slowly, she corrected. There's a difference. Dutch stood, joints popping audibly. Sarah's right. Look, I know you're set on this course. I can see it in your eyes. You got that look my son had before he rode off to war. Never came back. But if you're going to do this thing, if you're really going to ride into San Marco and raise hell, you need to at least be able to sit a horse without falling off. I'm sitting one fine. You fell off this morning, Dutch pointed out. Storm here had to stand guard over you. Raphael had no answer to that. The fever was creeping back, making the edges of everything soft and uncertain. He felt himself slipping again toward the darkness, fought against it, but Sarah's cool hand on his forehead seemed to push him gently down. Sleep, she said softly. We'll watch over you. When you wake up, we'll talk about San Marco, about the Mendozas, about how a smart man goes about staying alive long enough to actually accomplish his revenge. Raphael wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at him with irresistible force. The last thing he heard before darkness claimed him was Dutch's voice, low and thoughtful. Sarah, Get the wagon ready. We're taking him with us. Where? The old mining camp, the one where your father used to work. It's abandoned now, but the structures are still sound. He can recover there without being found. Granddad, if the Mendozas discover we helped him, I know the risks, girl, but I also know what it's like to have nothing left but rage and a need to make things right. Your father felt that way once. I didn't help him, and he died in some nameless battle 1,000 miles from home. Maybe this time I can make a different choice. Raphael floated in and out of awareness as they loaded him into the wagon. Storm followed behind, tied to the back, his hoofbeats a steady rhythm against the desert floor. The wagon wheels creaked and groaned over rough terrain, each bump sending fresh pain through Raphael's body. But it was distant pain, muffled by fever and exhaustion. He dreamed of Elena teaching Carmen how to make bread, her hands guiding their daughter's smaller ones through the familiar motions. He dreamed of Miguel asking about the rifle, eager to learn, promising to be careful. He dreamed of Tomas laughing, his small body warm and solid as Raphael lifted him onto Storm's back for his first ride. Then the dream shifted, darkened. Vega's face looming close, that terrible smile. Gunshots echoing across the desert, flames consuming everything he'd built. And through it all, a question that pounded in his brain like a second heartbeat. Why did I let them in? Why did I offer mercy to men who had none to give? The answer, when it came, was simple and devastating, because you still believed the world was fair, because you thought hospitality and decency meant something, because you were a fool. He woke to the sound of water dripping. The fever had broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed. He lay on a bedroll in what appeared to be an abandoned miner's shack, rough wood walls, a dirt floor, gaps in the planking that let in slices of late-afternoon sun. Sarah sat nearby, mending a shirt, her face calm and focused. "You're awake," she observed without looking up from her needlework. "Good. Granddad was starting to worry you might not wake up at all." Raphael tried to sit up and managed it on the third attempt. His body felt like it belonged to someone else, all the parts connected wrong, responding sluggishly to his commands. "How long?" 3 days since we found you. We're at the old Copper Ridge mining camp, about 2 days northeast of San Marco. Nobody comes here anymore. The vein played out 6 years ago." Raphael took inventory of his condition. The wounds were clean, properly bandaged. Someone had stripped off his blood-soaked clothes and given him a rough cotton shirt and clean pants. His rifle leaned against the wall within easy reach. Storm's saddle sat in the corner, oiled and maintained. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Sarah set down her mending and finally met his eyes. "Because my father was killed by the Mendozas 3 years ago. He worked a small claim about 10 miles from San Marco. Started finding good silver, enough to make a real profit. The Mendozas offered to buy him out for pennies. When he refused," she paused, her jaw tightening. "They burned his claim, killed him and the 6 men working for him, made it look like an accident. I'm sorry." "So am I. But sorry doesn't change anything." She stood, moving to a small cook stove where a pot of something that smelled like rabbit stew simmered. "Granddad wanted to fight back, but he was already old, and I was just 17. What could we do? So we swallowed it, took what little they gave us for the claim and moved on. Been swallowing it ever since." She ladled stew into a tin bowl and brought it to Raphael. "But you're not planning to swallow it, are you?" "No." "Good." The single word carried a weight of feeling that told Raphael everything he needed to know about the past 3 years of her life. "Eat. You need strength." The stew was simple but nourishing. Raphael ate slowly, feeling life creep back into his body with each bite. Dutch appeared in the doorway as he was finishing, the old man's weathered face breaking into a gap-toothed smile. "Well now, look who decided to rejoin the living. How you feeling?" "Like I got shot 3 times and dragged through hell." "That's because you did." Dutch settled himself on an overturned crate, his movements betraying the ache of old bones. "But you're healing, better than I expected, truth be told. You're tougher than you look." "I have to be." "Yes, you do." Dutch pulled out his tobacco pouch. "Now then, you want to tell me your plan for San Marco? Because walking in blind and shooting everything that moves might feel satisfying for about 10 seconds before they cut you down." Raphael set aside the empty bowl. I don't have a plan, just a list of names and a promise to myself. That's what I figured, which is why I'm going to help you develop one. I don't need... Yes, you do. Dutch's voice took on a hard edge. Son, I respect your rage. I understand your need to make this right. But rage without strategy is just noise. The Mendozas didn't build their empire by being stupid or careless. They're organized, they're ruthless, and they've survived more than a dozen attempts on their power. You want to take them down? You need to be smarter than they are, meaner than they are, more patient than they are. I don't have time for patience. You have exactly as much time as it takes to do this right. Dutch lit his cigarette. Because if you rush in half-cocked, you'll die, and the Mendozas will use your corpse as another warning to anyone else thinking about resistance. Your family's deaths won't be avenged. They'll just be compounded by your own. The words hit Raphael like a physical blow. He wanted to argue, to insist that his need for vengeance trumped tactical considerations. But underneath the rage, a colder, clearer part of his mind recognized the truth in Dutch's words. What do you suggest? He asked finally. Dutch smiled grimly. First, you finish healing. Another week at least. Use that time to learn everything you can about San Marco, about the Mendoza operation, about the men who killed your family. Sarah and I can get information. We still have contacts in the area, people who owe us favors or who have their own reasons to see the Mendozas brought down. A week is nothing compared to forever dead, Dutch interrupted. Second, you stop thinking like a rancher and start thinking like a guerrilla. You can't fight them head on, can't march into town and challenge them to a duel. You have to be a ghost, strike from shadows, hit them where they're weak, when they're not expecting it, make them afraid, make them paranoid, turn their own strength against them. Raphael absorbed this, his mind already beginning to shift, to adapt. Dutch was right. Vega had been right too, in his own way. One man couldn't stand against an organization. But one man with nothing to lose, with patience and cunning, and a willingness to become something other than human, that was different. Tell me about San Marco, Raphael said. Tell me everything. Dutch and Sarah spent the next hours painting a picture of the town and its masters. San Marco sat at the confluence of 3 trade routes, making it naturally wealthy. The Mendoza brothers, Alejandro, the elder, cold and calculating, Carlos, the younger, brutal and impulsive, had recognized its strategic value and seized control with methodical efficiency. Alejandro runs the business side, Dutch explained. He's the one who buys politicians, who arranges the legal cover for their operations. Smart as a snake and twice as poisonous, Carlos handles enforcement, the muscle, the intimidation, the violence. He's the one who sends men like Vega to deliver messages. Where do they live? Alejandro has a compound on the north side of town. Big walls, armed guards, the whole fortress approach. Carlos keeps rooms above the saloon, the Dusty Rose, they call it. Likes to be where the action is. Sarah added, they have lieutenants too. Vega's one of them. Then there's Rodriguez, who runs their gambling operations. Black Tom Miller, who handles their mining interests. A woman called La Vibera, the Viper, who manages their, other businesses. She looked away, color rising in her cheeks. How many men total? At least 50 who work directly for them. Maybe another 100 who'd side with them if push came to shove. Shopkeepers, miners, drifters who know which way the wind blows. Raphael did the math in his head. 50 to 1 odds, 100 to 1 if it came to open warfare. Impossible odds by any rational calculation. Perfect. What about the law? You said they own the sheriff. Sheriff Dawson. Dutch spat the name like a curse. He was honest once, maybe. But the Mendozas broke him the same way they break everyone. Now he looks the other way when convenient and enforces their will when necessary. Got 2 deputies, both young, both mean, both as corrupt as he is. And the people? The regular citizens? Sarah and Dutch exchanged glances. Scared, Sarah said simply. Most of them are good people who just want to live their lives. But the Mendozas have made examples enough times that nobody dares speak against them openly. There's resentment underneath, anger, but no organization, no leader to rally around. What if they had one? Dutch's eyes narrowed. What are you thinking? You said I can't fight them head on, can't take on 50 men by myself. But what if I didn't have to? What if I could turn the town against them, expose them, undermine them, make the people realize they outnumber their oppressors? That's ambitious, Dutch said slowly. Also dangerous. The Mendozas would see it coming and crush any uprising before it got started. Not if it started from within, not if it looked like their own organization was falling apart from the inside. Dutch leaned forward, interest kindling in his eyes. Keep talking. Raphael's mind was working now, fever clarity giving way to cold calculation. They control through fear and organization. What happens when their men start dying? When their operations get disrupted? When they can't trust each other? Fear works both ways, and organizations, they can be broken from within. You're talking about psychological warfare, Sarah said, making them paranoid, turning them against each other. Exactly, they're criminals. They don't trust each other anyway. They just fear the Mendozas more than they hate each other. Change that equation. Dutch was nodding now, a fierce smile spreading across his weathered face. And the whole thing comes tumbling down. But, son, that takes time, takes planning, takes being willing to be patient while you set the pieces in motion. I can be patient, Raphael said, and was surprised to find he meant it. The burning need for immediate vengeance hadn't diminished, but it had crystallized into something colder and more focused. If patience means I take them all down instead of just dying loud, I can be patient. Over the next week, Raphael healed with stubborn determination. Each morning, he forced himself through exercises despite the protests of his wounds, push-ups, squats, drawing and aiming his rifle until his hands stopped shaking. Sarah changed his bandages daily, watching the infection recede and healthy tissue begin to knit. Dutch brought books from somewhere, military strategy, treatises on guerrilla warfare, anything that might prove useful. But the most valuable resource was information. Dutch and Sarah made trips to San Marco and the surrounding settlements, listening to gossip, trading for news. They built a detailed picture of the Mendoza organization, who reported to whom, where money changed hands, which operations were most vulnerable, which men were loyal, and which were simply afraid. They learned that Vega had returned to San Marco 3 days after the raid on Raphael's ranch, boasting about the message he'd delivered, that he and his men spent their nights at the Dusty Rose, drinking and gambling, that Carlos Mendoza himself had praised the operation's efficiency. Each detail Raphael absorbed with focused intensity, filing it away in a mental map of the enemy. He learned the names of Vega's men, the ones who had survived his initial resistance. Raul Espinoza, the scarred man who died first. Marcos Delgado and Tomas Reyes, who'd helped burn the house. Diego Cardenas, who'd laughed as Elena fought. Vicente Cruz, who'd lined the children against the wall. Names, faces, descriptions of their habits and weaknesses. All of it stored in the dark place where his heart used to be. On the 8th day, Dutch declared him fit enough to travel. Not fully healed, the old man cautioned, but functional, and that'll have to be enough. That evening, the three of them sat around a small fire outside the shack. Raphael felt stronger than he had since the night his world ended, though strength was relative. He could ride, could shoot, could think clearly. It would have to suffice. So, Dutch said, pouring coffee from a battered pot, you ready to hear the rest of what I learned? Tell me. Vega's got a routine. Every Tuesday night, he rides out to check on one of the Mendoza mining operations. A silver claim about 5 miles northwest of San Marco. Takes 2 men with him, always the same 2. Delgado and Reyes. Raphael's hands tightened on his coffee cup. Just 3 of them? Just 3. They collect the week's take, rough up anyone who needs roughing up, ride back before midnight. Been doing it like clockwork for 6 months. When's the next Tuesday? Tomorrow. The word hung in the air between them. Tomorrow. The possibility of beginning his vengeance, of drawing first blood, just 1 day away. There's a canyon on the route they take, Sarah said, pulling out a hand-drawn map. Narrow passage, steep walls on both sides. If someone was positioned right, they could control the whole choke point. Raphael studied the map, his tactical mind already calculating angles, timing, positions. An ambush. An ambush, Dutch confirmed. 3-on-1 odds, but you'd have surprise in position. And if you pull it off, you take out Vega and 2 of his men in one strike. Send your own message back to the Mendozas. They'll know someone's gunning for them. They'll suspect, but they won't know who or where you'll hit next. That's where the psychological warfare starts. Make them afraid. Make them question who they can trust. Start the rot from within. Raphael set down his coffee and stood, walking to the edge of the firelight. The desert stretched out before him, vast and empty under a field of stars. Somewhere out there, Vega was drinking and laughing, secure in his power, believing the message he'd delivered had been received and internalized. Tomorrow, Raphael would deliver a response. "I'll need to scout the canyon," he said. "See the ground for myself." "Already done," Sarah replied. "I rode out there yesterday. Drew the map from memory. The best position is on the eastern rim, about 200 yards from the narrowest point. You'll have clear sight lines and multiple escape routes." Raphael turned to look at her. "You're better at this than you let on." She met his eyes without flinching. "My father taught me to think tactically before the Mendozas killed him. Said a smart person always has a plan and a backup plan and a way out. I've spent 3 years thinking about how I'd hurt them if I had the chance. Now you're giving me that chance. This is my fight." "It's our fight," Dutch corrected. "Soon as we decided to help you, it became ours too." Sarah's right. We've been wanting to strike back for years. Just didn't have the will or the means. You're both. Raphael started to protest, to argue that he couldn't accept help, that their risk was too great. But looking at their faces, Dutch's lined with old grief and new determination, Sarah's bright with fierce purpose, he understood that refusing would be an insult. They needed this as much as he did, maybe more. "All right," he said quietly, "then we do it together, but on my terms. Nobody takes unnecessary risks. If things go wrong, you get out. Agreed?" "Agreed," Dutch said. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. They spent the rest of the night planning, going over every detail until Raphael could see the ambush playing out in his mind with crystal clarity, where he'd position himself, how he'd account for wind and distance. What he'd do if Vega brought more men, or changed his route, or somehow detected the trap. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, Raphael saddled Storm and prepared to ride. Dutch and Sarah would stay behind, waiting for his return. If he didn't come back by noon the next day, they were to assume he'd failed and leave immediately, covering their tracks. "One more thing," Dutch said as Raphael mounted up. He handed over a leather pouch heavy with ammunition. "This is for afterward, when you start hitting their other operations. Can't fight a war with an empty rifle." Raphael secured the pouch to his saddle. "Thank you. For everything." "Don't thank us. Just finish what you're starting. Make them pay for every drop of blood they've spilled." Dutch's voice went rough with emotion. "Make them remember that some debts come due no matter how much power you have." Raphael rode out into the rising sun, Storm's hoofbeats steady against the hard pan. The desert had tested him and found him worthy. He'd survived its crucible, been reforged in its unforgiving heat. Now he would become what the desert had always been, beautiful, merciless, and absolutely lethal to those who underestimated it. The canyon was exactly as Sarah had described. Raphael approached from the east in mid-afternoon, taking his time, moving carefully to avoid leaving obvious tracks. The walls rose 70 feet on either side, sandstone carved by centuries of flash floods into smooth curves and sharp overhangs. The floor was maybe 30 feet wide at its narrowest point, plenty of room for 3 riders, but tight enough to make evasion difficult. Perfect. He spent hours studying the terrain, memorizing every feature, every shadow, every possible variable. The sun tracked across the sky, painting the canyon walls in shifting bands of light and dark. Raphael found his position, a slight outcropping on the eastern rim that offered both cover and clear sightlines. He ranged the distance, 215 yards to the kill zone, well within his capability, especially with surprise and preparation. As evening approached, he made a cold camp behind a tumble of boulders a quarter-mile from the canyon. No fire, no movement that might catch a watcher's eye. He ate jerky and drank sparingly from his canteen, conserving resources. Then he settled in to wait, his rifle across his knees, his mind utterly calm. The rage was still there, burning in his core like banked coals. But it was controlled now, channeled, transformed from wild fury into calculated purpose. This was no longer about emotional release. This was about dismantling an empire one piece at a time, starting with the man who'd destroyed his family. Night fell. Stars emerged, brilliant and cold against the black sky. Raphael didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, even if he'd wanted to. Instead, he existed in a state of perfect awareness, every sense attuned to his surroundings. He heard coyotes calling in the distance, felt the temperature drop as the desert gave up its heat, watched the moon rise, 3/4 full, bathing the landscape in silver light. And he thought about Vega, about the man's easy confidence, his casual cruelty, his absolute certainty that power made him untouchable. Tomorrow, Raphael would teach him a final lesson about the difference between power and invincibility. Dawn came with aching slowness. Raphael moved to his position in the pre-dawn darkness, settling himself among the rocks with his rifle ready. The sun climbed. Morning stretched toward afternoon. Hours passed with glacial patience. Then, just after 2 in the afternoon, he heard them. Horses moving at an easy walk, men talking and laughing, confident and careless. Raphael's heart rate didn't change. His breathing remained steady. He simply waited, finger resting lightly on the trigger, until 3 riders entered the canyon below. Vega rode in the middle, his black hat marking him clearly. Delgado on his left, Reyes on his right. They were arguing about something, their voices echoing off the canyon walls, making it impossible to miss their approach. Raphael let them enter the kill zone. Let them reach the exact center of the narrowest section. Let them bunch together as they navigated around a fallen boulder. Then he fired. The first shot took Vega in the chest, punching him backward off his horse. The second caught Delgado in the throat before the man could even draw his weapon. Reyes managed to get his gun clear, managed to fire one wild shot toward the canyon rim before Raphael's third bullet found his skull. 3 shots, 3 bodies. 15 seconds from first trigger pull to final echo fading into silence. Raphael worked the rifle bolt, chambering a fresh round, but there was no need. All 3 men were down, their horses scattering in panic. He waited 5 full minutes, watching for any sign of movement, before finally lowering his weapon. It was done. The first blow struck, the first message delivered. But as he looked down at Vega's body, sprawled in the dust, that confident smirk erased forever, Raphael felt no satisfaction, no joy, no relief, just a cold acknowledgement that this was one debt partially paid. One name crossed off a very long list. He gathered the body's weapons and ammunition, stripped them of anything useful, then left them where they'd fallen. Let the Mendozas find them like this. Let them see what happened when they pushed a peaceful man past the point of return. Raphael rode away from the canyon as the sun began its descent toward evening, storm carrying him steadily back toward the mining camp. Behind him, 3 more graves waited to be discovered. Ahead lay the long campaign, the patient dismantling of everything the Mendozas had built. The war had begun, and Rafael Cortez had become death's instrument, relentless and unstoppable as the desert itself. Dutch and Sarah were waiting at the canyon entrance when Raphael rode up just before sunset. The old man's eyes went immediately to the fresh ammunition belt slung across Storm's saddle, to the 3 rifles Raphael had taken from the dead men, and he nodded slowly, understanding everything that mattered. "Clean?" Dutch asked. "Clean." "Good." Dutch turned his horse back toward the mining camp. "Then we need to move fast. They'll find the bodies by morning, maybe sooner if Vega had a backup schedule. Once they do, San Marco's going to explode like a kicked hornet's nest." They rode hard through the gathering darkness, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Sarah kept glancing at Raphael, her expression unreadable in the failing light. When they finally stopped to rest the animals, she moved close enough that her voice wouldn't carry. "How do you feel?" she asked quietly. Raphael understood what she was really asking. How did it feel to kill 3 men in cold blood? How did it feel to cross that line from victim to executioner? How did it feel to become the thing you were fighting against? "Empty," he said, and it was the truth. "I thought I'd feel something. Relief, maybe, or guilt, but there's just nothing. Like I'm hollow inside." Sarah was quiet for a moment. My granddad says that happens. That when you lose everything, the person you used to be dies too. What's left is just the shape of a man, walking and talking, but the soul's gone somewhere else. Your granddad's a wise man. He's a sad man who's learned to live with his sadness. She touched Raphael's arm briefly. Don't let the emptiness consume you completely. Hold on to something, even if it's just anger. Because if you lose that too, there won't be anything left worth saving. They reached the mining camp well after midnight. Raphael tended to Storm personally, brushing the horse down, checking his hooves, making sure he had food and water. The simple routine was grounding, a connection to the rancher he'd been before everything shattered. When he finally entered the shack, he found Dutch studying a collection of papers spread across a makeshift table. "What's all this?" Raphael asked. "Maps, schedules, every piece of intelligence Sarah and I have gathered about Mendoza operations." Dutch looked up, his weathered face grim in the lamplight. "Now that you've bloodied their nose, we need to think 3 moves ahead. They're going to respond, and their response will tell us a lot about their organization." Raphael moved closer, examining the papers. Someone, probably Sarah, had drawn detailed diagrams of San Marco's layout, marked with notations about which buildings the Mendozas controlled, where their men congregated, when patrols ran through the streets. Other documents listed names, relationships, chains of command. "This is impressive," Raphael said. "This is 3 years of careful observation," Dutch replied. "Sarah's got a mind for details. Every time we visited San Marco, she memorized a little more, drew it all out when we got home. I thought maybe someday we'd use it to plan our own revenge. Never quite had the courage." He met Raphael's eyes. "You gave us that courage. Now we need to use it wisely." Sarah entered carrying a pot of coffee and 3 tin cups. "They'll send someone to investigate when Vega doesn't report back. Probably Rodriguez. He's Carlos Mendoza's second in command. He'll take at least 12 men, maybe more. They'll comb that canyon looking for evidence." "Let them look," Raphael said. "They won't find anything except bodies and spent shells. No tracks leading back here, no witnesses, nothing that tells them who or where." "They'll assume it was you," Dutch pointed out. "Vega bragged about what he did to your family. Carlos Mendoza's not stupid. He'll make the connection." "Good. Let him know I'm coming. Let them all know." Dutch shook his head. "You're thinking about this wrong, son. Fear's a tool, sure, but so is uncertainty. Right now we want them confused, not just scared. We want them wondering if this was you, or a rival gang, or their own men turning on each other. The more questions they have, the more they'll tear themselves apart looking for answers." Raphael poured coffee, considering. Dutch was right. He'd been thinking like a rancher seeking direct confrontation, not like a guerrilla waging psychological war. "So we misdirect them, make it look like an internal conflict." Exactly. Dutch tapped one of the maps. "Rodriguez runs their gambling operations. He and Vega never got along. Everyone knew it. Vega thought Rodriguez was skimming. Rodriguez thought Vega was overstepping. If we plant evidence suggesting Rodriguez was behind the hit, they'll turn on each other," Sarah finished. "Carlos might even kill Rodriguez himself doing our work for us." It was clever. Ruthless. Exactly the kind of strategic thinking that would multiply Raphael's effectiveness far beyond what one man with a rifle could achieve alone, but it also required patience, subtlety, a willingness to let others die in his place. Could he do that? Could he become that calculating? He thought of Elena, of Miguel, of Carmen and Tomas, thought of their bodies in the dirt, their lives snuffed out to send a message. The Mendozas hadn't hesitated, hadn't shown mercy or restraint or any consideration for innocence. Why should he? "Tell me what we need to do," Raphael said. They worked through the night, refining the plan. Dutch knew a contact in San Marco, a stable master named Chen who'd lost his brother to Mendoza violence and harbored quiet hatred for the organization. Chen could plant evidence if given the right items and the right story. A knife that belonged to one of Rodriguez's men, found near the canyon. A witness claiming to have seen Rodriguez's distinctive horse in the area. Small details that would add up to damning circumstantial evidence. "Chen's risking his life doing this," Sarah warned. "If the Mendozas discover he's involved, then we make sure they don't discover it," Raphael said. "How do we contact him?" "I'll do it," Dutch offered. I've known Chen for 15 years. He trusts me. I'll ride into San Marco tomorrow, casual-like, just an old man buying supplies. Have a quiet conversation. Plant the seeds. That puts you at risk, Dutch smiled without humor. Son, I'm 73 years old. Every morning I wake up is borrowed time. If the Mendozas kill me for buying flour and gossiping with an old friend, then at least I'll die doing something that matters. Besides, they don't know I'm connected to you. Far as anyone knows, I'm just another frontier relic too old to be dangerous. Raphael wanted to argue, but he recognized the steel in Dutch's voice. The old man had made his choice. Refusing to accept his help would be both foolish and insulting. All right, Raphael agreed, but you're careful. Any sign of trouble, you get out. I've been careful my whole life, Dutch said. That's why I'm still alive when better men are dead. Dutch left at first light, his old wagon creaking down the trail towards San Marco. Raphael watched him go with a sense of having set something irreversible in motion. Before, his vengeance had been personal, contained. Now it was spreading, drawing others in, creating ripples that would touch lives he'd never know. Sarah seemed to sense his thoughts. Second thoughts? She asked, just thinking about consequences. The consequences started when Vega rode onto your land. Everything since then is just reaction. She began cleaning the breakfast dishes, her movements efficient. You want to know what I think? I think the Mendozas have been consequence-free for too long. They've killed and stolen and brutalized with impunity, believing their power made them untouchable. Someone needs to show them they're wrong. Someone needs to be their consequence. Even if innocent people get caught in the middle? Who's innocent in San Marco? The shopkeepers who take Mendoza money knowing where it comes from? The miners who look away when enforcers rough up their neighbors? The sheriff who wears a badge and serves criminals? Sarah's voice hardened. They're all complicit, Raphael. Every single person who stayed silent while the Mendozas built their empire is guilty of enabling it. Maybe it's time they faced some consequences too. Her words echoed thoughts Raphael had been avoiding. It was easier to see himself as a righteous avenger than to acknowledge the darker truth, that his campaign would inevitably hurt people who hadn't directly harmed him. But war, even a personal war, didn't allow for such fine distinctions. Collateral damage was inevitable. The question was whether the end justified the means. Raphael spent the day maintaining his weapons and equipment, his hands working while his mind wandered through dark territory. By evening, he'd cleaned and oiled every gun, sharpened his knife to razor keenness, and inventoried his remaining ammunition. 300 rounds, give or take. Enough for several engagements if he was careful. Dutch returned just after sunset, his wagon laden with legitimate supplies that concealed the true purpose of his visit. He moved slowly, his face lined with exhaustion, and sank onto a stool with a grateful sigh. It's done, he said. Chen has the knife. He'll discover it tomorrow morning and make sure word reaches the right ears. By noon, half of San Marco will be whispering about Rodriguez being behind Vega's death. How did the town look? Raphael asked. Tense. They found the bodies this morning, just like we figured. Carlos Mendoza went ballistic, broke furniture, threatened everyone in sight. Rodriguez is already on the defensive, denying involvement before anyone's even officially accused him. It's beautiful, really. The paranoia is already eating them from inside. Sarah poured coffee for her grandfather. Did you see any of them? The other men from the raid? Dutch nodded grimly. Saw Cardenas and Cruz drinking at the Dusty Rose. They looked nervous, kept watching the doors like they expected death to walk through any second. He smiled coldly. Good. Let them sweat. Over the next 3 days, Sarah made careful reconnaissance trips to San Marco, bringing back updates on the deteriorating situation. Rodriguez had been summoned to explain himself to Carlos Mendoza. The meeting had ended with shouting and thrown objects. 2 of Rodriguez's men had been badly beaten by Mendoza enforcers. Tensions were escalating exactly as planned, but Dutch cautioned against moving too quickly. We need to let this simmer, he said. Let them tear chunks out of each other before we strike again. The more divided they become, the weaker their response when we hit them next. Raphael chafed against the enforced patience. Every day of waiting felt like betrayal, like allowing his family's killers to draw breath they didn't deserve. But he trusted Dutch's experience and Sarah's observations. This was a long game, not a quick revenge. If he wanted to truly destroy the Mendozas, he needed to think beyond the next kill. On the 5th day after Vega's death, Sarah returned from San Marco with explosive news. "Rodriguez is dead," she announced. "Carlos Mendoza had him shot this morning, dragged him into the street and executed him in front of everyone." Rafael felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "Our plan worked. Better than we expected, but there's more." Sarah's expression was troubled. Before he died, Rodriguez swore he had nothing to do with Vega's murder, kept saying someone was setting him up, that there was a ghost working against them. Carlos didn't believe him, but his words got people thinking. Now there's whispers about an invisible enemy, someone smart enough to turn the Mendozas against themselves. "Which means they'll be more cautious," Dutch observed, "more paranoid. That works to our advantage." "Maybe," Sarah said, "but it also means they know they're under attack. They're doubling patrols, restricting movement, tightening security around key operations. It's going to be harder to move against them now." Rafael considered this. They'd achieved the first objective, sowing discord and eliminating targets. But they'd also revealed their existence, if not their identity. The Mendozas knew someone was hunting them. The game had entered a new phase. "Then we adapt," he said. "What operations are most vulnerable right now?" Dutch pulled out his maps again, tracing supply lines with a gnarled finger. "They move money every Friday from the mining operations to Alejandro's compound. Usually 6 guards, sometimes 8. With Rodriguez dead and everyone paranoid, that detail's going to be undermanned or overstaffed. Either way, disrupted." "We hit the money," Rafael said. "But we don't keep it. We distribute it to the miners, to the families the Mendozas have bled dry. Turn their own wealth against them." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Robin Hood tactics. The people will love it. Might even inspire some to resist openly." "Or it might get them killed," Dutch countered. "The Mendozas don't tolerate defiance. Anyone caught with that money will face brutal consequences." "Then we make sure it's distributed anonymously," Rafael said. "Leave it where people will find it. In water barrels, under doorsteps, anywhere the Mendozas can't directly trace. Let people take it and hide it before anyone knows it's gone." They planned the robbery with meticulous care. The money shipment followed a predictable route from the northern mines through a series of switchbacks down to the valley floor. There was a point, about 3 miles from San Marco, where the trail narrowed considerably. Not as dramatic as the canyon where Vega died, but sufficient for an ambush if executed properly. Rafael would need help for this one. 6 guards were too many for a single shooter to take down before they could scatter or return fire. Dutch volunteered immediately, despite his age. Sarah insisted on participating too, and Rafael found he couldn't refuse her. She'd proven herself capable and committed. Treating her as fragile would be both dishonest and tactically stupid. They spent 2 days preparing. Rafael and Dutch test-fired their rifles, adjusting sights and confirming their weapons were perfectly zeroed. Sarah, who'd been taught to shoot by her father, demonstrated surprising proficiency with both rifle and pistol. They rehearsed the ambush timing until they could execute it smoothly, each person knowing their role without need for communication. On Friday morning, they rode out before dawn and positioned themselves along the trail. Rafael took the high ground, overlooking the ambush point. Dutch covered the rear approach, preventing escape. Sarah had the most dangerous position, forward and low, where she could hit the lead riders but would be exposed if things went wrong. Rafael had argued against putting her in harm's way, but she'd shut him down with cold logic. "I'm the smallest target and the quickest. If they return fire, I can get behind cover faster than either of you. Besides, this is my fight too. Stop treating me like I'm fragile." So they waited, each in position, as the sun climbed and the day warmed. Rafael found his mind drifting to another ambush, another morning spent waiting for enemies who didn't know death was watching. But this time he wasn't alone. This time he had allies who shared his purpose. The money shipment appeared just before noon, 7 guards, as Sarah's intelligence had predicted, surrounding a reinforced wagon. They moved cautiously, weapons ready, eyes scanning the terrain. The paranoia was evident in their jerky movements, their constant communication. They knew they were vulnerable. They just didn't know how vulnerable. Rafael let them enter the kill zone, waited until the wagon was centered, The guard spread out but still within range. Then he fired. His first shot dropped the wagon driver. Dutch's rifle barked a half-second later, taking down the rear guard. Sarah's shots came in rapid succession, 1, 2, 3, precise and deadly. Within 10 seconds, 5 guards were down or dying. The remaining 2 tried to rally, returning fire wildly toward the ridgeline. Raphael shot one through the chest. The last guard threw down his weapon and ran, sprinting back up the trail with the desperate speed of a man who understood his life hung by a thread. Dutch fired once, twice. Both shots missed. The guard disappeared around a bend in the trail. "Let him go," Raphael called out. "One survivor to tell the tale." They descended quickly, weapons ready for any surprise. But the guards were thoroughly dead or incapacitated. The wagon sat intact, its strongbox secured with a heavy padlock. Raphael shot the lock off and opened the box. Money. More money than he'd seen in his entire life. Stacks of bills, bags of coins, the accumulated wealth extracted from miners and merchants, and anyone else the Mendozas could squeeze. Enough to change 100 lives, enough to fund a small revolution. "We need to move fast," Dutch urged. "That one who got away will bring reinforcements." They loaded what they could carry onto their horses, then Raphael drove the wagon off the trail and concealed it in a ravine. The rest of the money would stay hidden there until they could distribute it safely. Taking the wagon into San Marco would be suicide. As they rode away from the ambush site, Raphael felt something shift inside him. This hadn't been about personal vengeance. This had been about hurting the Mendoza's operation, about redistributing stolen wealth, about striking a blow for every person they'd victimized. It was bigger than his family, bigger than his pain. Maybe that's what Sarah had meant about holding on to something. Maybe the key wasn't to preserve his old self, but to find a new purpose in the ashes of the old one. They reached San Marco after nightfall, approaching from the south where sentries were lightest. Dutch had arranged for Chen and 2 other trusted contacts to help with distribution. Working in careful coordination, they moved through the darkened streets, leaving money in places it would be found, outside the homes of widows, near the quarters where miners slept, hidden in places children would discover it. By dawn they were gone, melting back into the desert before anyone knew they'd been there. But by mid-morning, as people woke and found unexpected wealth, San Marco erupted into chaos. Sarah brought news later that day. It's pandemonium. People are finding money everywhere. Some are hiding it, some are spending it immediately, some are turning it over to the authorities out of fear, but everyone's talking. Everyone knows someone hit the Mendozas and gave the money to the people. "How's Carlos reacting?" Raphael asked. "Like a rabid dog. He's torn through half the town, interrogating people, beating anyone he suspects of involvement. But he can't beat everyone, and he can't take back money that's already hidden or spent. His control is slipping." "The guard who escaped," Dutch said. "What's he saying?" "That's the interesting part. He's claiming 3 shooters ambushed them. Professional killers, he says. Military precision. Carlos is convinced it's a rival organization moving into his territory. He's pulled men back from the outlying operations to defend the town itself." Raphael absorbed this, seeing the strategic implications. The Mendozas were contracting, consolidating, behaving defensively. That opened opportunities elsewhere, operations and outposts now undermanned or abandoned entirely. Over the following week, they exploited those opportunities ruthlessly. Raphael hit a gambling den that Black Tom Miller operated, burning it to the ground after the patrons had fled. Sarah sabotaged a mine office, destroying records that proved ownership of disputed claims. Dutch spread rumors about La Vibra planning to betray the Mendozas, setting up another internal conflict. Each strike was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing personal risk. They never hit the same type of target twice. Never established a pattern. Never stayed in one place long enough to be tracked. Raphael moved through the campaign with machine-like efficiency, his personal grief channeled into tactical precision. But the cost was evident. Each night, he slept less. Each morning, he woke with the taste of ash in his mouth. The emptiness Sarah had warned about grew larger, hollowing him out from the inside. He was becoming effective, but he was also becoming something less than human. One evening, as he sat cleaning his rifle by firelight, Sarah approached him with unusual hesitance. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Raphael nodded without looking up. When this is over, when you've killed everyone responsible, when the Mendoza Empire is destroyed, what happens to you? The question hung in the air between them. Raphael's hand stilled on the rifle. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Maybe you should, because the way you're going, you'll either be dead or something worse than dead. You'll be alive but empty, a walking ghost with nothing left inside. I'm already empty. No, you're not. Not completely. I still see flashes of the man you were, the rancher who offered hospitality to strangers, the father who built a home with his own hands. That man's dying, Raphael. And once he's completely gone, I'm not sure what'll be left. Raphael finally looked at her. What do you want me to do, Sarah? Stop? Walk away? Pretend Elena and my children didn't die screaming while I lay bleeding in the dirt? I want you to remember that revenge is a means, not an end. That destroying the Mendozas is about more than satisfying your need for vengeance. It's about freeing this territory from tyranny, about giving people hope that monsters can be beaten. She paused. But if you become a monster in the process, then what have we really accomplished? Raphael had no answer for that. He returned to cleaning his rifle, the repetitive motions soothing in their simplicity. Sarah sat with him in silence for a while, then stood to leave. There's a difference between justice and revenge, she said softly. Between necessary violence and cruelty for its own sake. Don't forget which side of that line you're fighting for. Her words echoed through the following days as Raphael continued his campaign. He became more aware of his own brutality, the casual way he calculated death, the cold satisfaction he felt when each target fell. Was he still fighting for justice? Or had justice become just another word for murder? The answer came 2 weeks after the money heist. Sarah returned from San Marco with her face pale, her hands shaking. What happened? Raphael demanded. Carlos Mendoza arrested Chen, the stablemaster. Someone informed on him said they saw him planting evidence about Rodriguez. Carlos had him tortured. Her voice broke. They killed him this morning, dragged him through the streets first so everyone could see what happens to traitors. Dutch stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. Chen, old Chen, that son of a... There's more, Sarah interrupted. Before he died, Chen didn't give us up. Didn't say anything about us even under torture. Just kept insisting he acted alone, that he hated the Mendozas for killing his brother. They killed him anyway. Silence filled the shack. Raphael felt something crack inside his chest, the protective numbness that had insulated him from feeling too deeply. Chen had died because of their plan. An innocent man, well, a good man at least, had been tortured and murdered to protect them. This was the cost Sarah had warned about, the collateral damage, the innocent blood on his hands. This is my fault, Raphael said quietly. It's Carlos Mendoza's fault, Dutch corrected sharply. Chen knew the risks. He chose to help us knowing exactly what would happen if he got caught. His blood is on Mendoza's hands, not ours. We asked him to take that risk. And he agreed, because he believed in what we're doing, because he wanted his brother's death to mean something. Dutch's voice gentled. Son, in war, and make no mistake, this is war, good people die. The question isn't whether you can avoid that entirely. The question is whether their sacrifice serves a purpose worth dying for. Raphael wanted to believe that, wanted to accept the logic that made Chen's death meaningful rather than merely tragic, but all he could see was another body added to the count, another family somewhere grieving, another life snuffed out in the escalating violence. We need to end this, he said. Soon, before more people like Chen pay for our war. Then we go after the Mendozas directly, Sarah said. No more peripheral targets. No more chipping away at the edges. We cut off the head. Dutch shook his head. That's suicide. Both brothers are heavily guarded now. Alejandro never leaves his compound without a dozen men. Carlos barely leaves the Dusty Rose, and when he does, he's surrounded by his best killers. So we bring the fight to them, Raphael said. The cold calculation was back, overriding his moment of doubt. We make them come to us, on ground of our choosing. How? Sarah asked. Raphael thought for a moment, pieces falling into place. They think we're a rival organization, some external threat trying to muscle into their territory. What if we confirm that? What if we send them a message demanding a meeting, a parley to discuss terms? They'll know it's a trap. Of course they will, but their pride won't let them refuse, especially Carlos. He's the hothead, the one who can't stand being challenged. If we word it right, make it seem like we're offering him a chance to prove his strength, he'll come, and he'll bring his best men with him. And then what? Dutch asked. We ambush them? That's still suicide odds. Not if we choose the right location, not if we prepare properly, not if we're willing to do whatever it takes. Raphael met their eyes. I know I'm asking you to risk everything. If you want out, I understand. This is my war. It doesn't have to be yours. Sarah laughed bitterly. You think we've come this far to back out now? My father's dead, Chen's dead. Hundreds of others are dead because the Mendozas think power makes them untouchable. If there's a chance, even a small one, to end this, we're taking it. Dutch nodded agreement. Besides, I told you already. I'm an old man on borrowed time. Rather spend it doing something meaningful than just waiting to die. Raphael felt gratitude wash through him, warm and unexpected in the cold landscape of his heart. Then we planned this carefully. One mistake, and we're all dead. They spent the next 3 days crafting the perfect trap. The location had to be defensible, but not obviously so. Somewhere Carlos would feel confident entering, but where they could control the engagement. They settled on an abandoned way station about 15 miles south of San Marco, built against a rocky hillside with clear sight lines and limited approaches. The message itself took careful composition. Too aggressive, and Carlos might smell the trap. Too weak, and he might send underlings instead of coming himself. Finally, they settled on a tone of calculated arrogance, a rival faction informing the Mendozas that the territory was changing hands, offering one chance to negotiate before all-out war. Sarah delivered the message through a network of intermediaries, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to them directly. Then they waited, preparing the way station with lethal attention to detail. Raphael positioned rifles at strategic points, cached ammunition, set up fields of fire. Dutch rigged crude explosives from mining supplies, not sophisticated but devastatingly effective in enclosed spaces. Sarah prepared escape routes and contingencies for if things went wrong. The reply came 4 days later. Carlos Mendoza would attend the parley, but on his terms. He'd bring 20 men. The meeting would be at noon in 2 days. Anyone attempting treachery would face the full weight of Mendoza retribution. 20 men, Dutch muttered. That's more than I expected. It's fewer than he could bring, Raphael countered. He's trying to seem strong while actually hedging his bets. Good. Overconfidence will make him careless. They refined their plans obsessively, accounting for every variable they could imagine. Raphael wouldn't be at the way station when Carlos arrived. That would be too obvious. Instead, Sarah would play the role of emissary, meeting Carlos outside while Raphael and Dutch were positioned in concealment, ready to spring the trap. It was risky. If Carlos simply shot Sarah on sight, the whole plan collapsed. But Sarah insisted she could handle it, that her youth and gender would make Carlos underestimate her, buy them crucial seconds. The night before the meeting, Raphael couldn't sleep. He lay awake staring at the ceiling of the shack, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. His family's death, his transformation from peaceful rancher to calculating killer, the people who'd helped him, some now dead, the path of bodies stretching behind him like markers on a road to hell. Tomorrow, it would end. One way or another, the campaign would conclude. Either the Mendozas would fall or Raphael would. There was no middle ground anymore, no possibility of retreat or compromise. He thought about what Sarah had said, about the difference between justice and revenge, between necessary violence and cruelty. He'd crossed lines he never imagined crossing, become something he never thought he'd be. But had it been for justice or just to feed the howling emptiness inside him? The answer, he realized, didn't matter anymore. He'd set events in motion that had their own momentum now. Whether his motivations were pure or corrupted, whether he was hero or monster, the outcome would be the same. Tomorrow, in the desert sun, accounts would be settled, debts would be paid. And Rafael Cortez would finally discover whether vengeance could fill the void where his soul used to be, or whether he was simply trading one kind of death for another. He rose before dawn and began his final preparations, his hands steady and his heart empty of everything but purpose. The sun rose blood-red over the desert, painting the sky in shades that seemed prophetic. Raphael watched it climb from his position behind a tumble of boulders 200 yards from the way station, his rifle resting across his knees, his breathing slow and measured. Beside him, Dutch checked his weapons for the 100th time, the old man's weathered hands steady despite the enormity of what they were about to attempt. "She'll be fine," Dutch said quietly, reading Raphael's tension. "Sarah's tougher than both of us combined. She knows what she's doing." Raphael nodded but didn't speak. Sarah had left an hour before dawn, riding toward the way station to prepare for her role as bait. The plan required her to stand in the open, exposed, and vulnerable, while Carlos Mendoza and his killers approached. Every instinct Raphael possessed screamed against using her this way, but she'd insisted, and her logic had been irrefutable. They needed someone Carlos wouldn't immediately perceive as a threat, someone who could buy crucial seconds while Raphael and Dutch got into position. Still, the weight of it pressed against Raphael's chest like a stone. Another person risking everything because of his war. Another life balanced on the edge of his need for vengeance. "Movement," Dutch murmured. Raphael shifted his focus to the southern approach. A dust cloud was rising, growing larger as riders materialized from the heat shimmer. He counted them carefully: 15, 16, 17 horses. Not the full 20 Carlos had promised, but close enough. They rode in a loose formation that suggested discipline and experience. These weren't random enforcers. These were Carlos's best men, the ones he trusted to handle serious threats. At the center of the group rode a man on a magnificent black stallion, his posture radiating arrogance even at this distance. Carlos Mendoza. Younger than his brother Alejandro, bigger, built like a bull, and moving with the confident swagger of someone who'd never truly been challenged. Raphael studied him through his rifle scope, memorizing every detail. This was the man who'd ordered his family's execution, who'd sent Vega to deliver that message written in blood and ash. The riders slowed as they approached the way station. Carlos raised a hand, and his men spread out in a defensive perimeter, weapons drawn, eyes scanning for threats. Professional. Careful. Not the careless approach Raphael had hoped for. Sarah emerged from the way station, walking with deliberate slowness into the open ground between the building and the approaching riders. She wore simple range clothes and carried no visible weapon, her hands held loosely at her sides. To someone who didn't know her, she looked young, vulnerable, insignificant. Carlos dismounted and walked toward her, flanked by two massive enforcers. Even from 200 yards away, Raphael could see the cruel amusement on his face. This was a man who enjoyed his power, who took pleasure in making others afraid. "You're the representative?" Carlos's voice carried across the desert, loud and mocking. "They sent a girl to negotiate with me?" "I'm here to deliver terms," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Not negotiate." Carlos laughed, and his men joined in, a chorus of contempt that echoed off the rocks. "Terms? That's funny. You got some guts, I'll give you that. Stupid guts, but guts nonetheless. The organization I represent controls the Northern Territories now. The mining operations, the trade routes, everything your brother thought he owned. We're offering you a choice. Withdraw peacefully and keep San Marco, or fight and lose everything." The laughter died. Carlos's expression darkened, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. "You're either insane or suicidal. Maybe both. Who do you represent? Who's stupid enough to challenge the Mendozas?" "That's not relevant. What matters is—" "What matters," Carlos interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "is that you're about to learn what happens to people who disrespect my family. Boys, search that building. I want to know if this little bird is alone or if her friends are hiding." 4 men broke from the group and moved toward the way station. Raphael's finger tightened on the trigger, but Dutch placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not yet," the old man whispered. "Let them get inside. Let them bunch up." Raphael forced himself to wait, every muscle screaming for action as the 4 men entered the way station. Through his scope, he could see Sarah's face, calm, controlled, showing no fear, even though she stood within arm's reach of men who could kill her without hesitation. "Nothing in here," one of the searchers called from inside. "Just an empty room," and the explosion turned the way station into a ball of fire and shattered wood. Dutch's carefully placed charges detonated simultaneously, the blast so powerful it threw debris 50 feet into the air. The 4 men inside simply ceased to exist, vaporized or torn apart in an instant. The concussion knocked Carlos and his flanking guards backward, sent horses screaming and bolting in panic. Raphael didn't wait to see more. His rifle spoke once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. 3 of Carlos's men went down before they could recover from the shock. Dutch was firing too, his old hand steady, each shot precise and deadly. 4 more men fell. Chaos erupted. The remaining enforcers tried to return fire, but they were disoriented, scattered, unsure where the shots were coming from. Sarah had already rolled behind cover, a water trough Raphael had positioned specifically for that purpose. She came up with a rifle she'd hidden there and started shooting, her bullets finding targets with surprising accuracy. Carlos was on his feet, roaring orders, trying to rally his men. He'd drawn his pistol and was firing blindly toward the rocks where Raphael was positioned, his face twisted with rage. 2 of his men grabbed him, tried to drag him toward his horse, toward escape. Raphael shot one of them through the head. Dutch got the other. Carlos stumbled, fell, came up with his pistol still in hand. "Cortez," he screamed, "I know it's you, you bastard! Come out and face me like a man!" So he'd figured it out. Good. Raphael wanted him to know, wanted him to understand exactly who was killing him and why. Raphael stood from cover, presenting himself as a target, his rifle aimed directly at Carlos's chest. The remaining enforcers, maybe 6 or 7 still standing, swung their weapons toward him. But Raphael didn't fire. Not yet. "Your brother sent Vega to my home," Raphael called out, his voice carrying across the killing ground. "Sent him to deliver a message about power and resistance. You remember that?" Carlos's face went pale beneath its tan as recognition dawned. You're supposed to be dead." "I was. The man I used to be died the same night you killed my family. What's left is just a promise. A debt collector." Raphael's finger rested lightly on the trigger. "You wanted to teach the frontier a lesson about crossing the Mendozas. Consider this your education in return." "You think killing me changes anything? My brother will hunt you to the ends of the earth. He'll kill everyone you've ever known. He'll do nothing," Raphael interrupted, "because he's next. This doesn't end with you, Carlos. This ends when everyone who had a hand in my family's death is in the ground. Every single one." Carlos raised his pistol, his hand shaking with rage or fear or both. "Then let's finish this, you son of a—" Raphael shot him through the heart. Carlos Mendoza, terror of San Marco, enforcer of his brother's empire, dropped like a puppet with cut strings. He was dead before his body hit the dust. The remaining enforcers broke then, their nerve finally shattering. Some tried to run. Some tried to mount horses that were long gone. Some just stood frozen, unable to process the complete reversal of their fortunes. Raphael, Dutch, and Sarah cut them down without mercy, without hesitation. This wasn't about fair fights or honorable combat. This was extermination. When the last man fell, silence descended over the killing ground. Bodies lay scattered across the desert floor like broken dolls, blood soaking into the thirsty earth. The way station was a smoking ruin. The smell of gunpowder and death hung heavy in the still air. Raphael walked through the carnage toward where Carlos lay. The man's eyes were still open, staring sightlessly at the sky. Raphael felt nothing looking at him. No satisfaction, no relief, no sense of completion, just emptiness, vast and echoing. Sarah approached from the left, her rifle still held ready, her face pale but composed. "Is it over?" "Half over," Raphael replied. "Carlos is dead, but Alejandro still lives, and he's the brains of this operation, the real threat." Dutch joined them, reloading his rifle with methodical care. "News of this will reach San Marco within hours. Alejandro will know his brother is dead. He'll fortify his compound, call in every man he has. Getting to him will be 10 times harder than this was." "I know." Raphael looked toward the north, toward San Marco and the remaining Mendoza brother. but we've already crossed the point of no return. Alejandro won't stop hunting us until one of us is dead. Might as well be him. They spent the next hour stripping the dead of weapons and ammunition, gathering intelligence from the bodies. Several of the enforcers carried papers, supply lists, payroll records, messages between Alejandro and his various operations. Dutch pored over them with growing excitement. "This is a treasure trove," he said. "Look at this. Locations of every operation Alejandro runs, names of corrupt officials on his payroll, details about shipments and schedules. With this information, we could cripple his entire network." "Or we could use it to find him," Sarah suggested. "There's a pattern to his movements. He visits certain operations on specific days. If we can predict where he'll be..." Rafael studied the documents, his tactical mind processing the data. Alejandro Mendoza was careful, paranoid even. He varied his routes, changed his schedules, never stayed in one place long. But patterns existed for those who knew how to find them, and these papers provided the key. "Here," Rafael pointed to a series of dates and locations. "He inspects the main mine personally on the 1st of every month. Brings a small security detail, 10 men maximum, because he doesn't want to draw attention or disrupt operations." "The 1st is 3 days from now," Dutch observed. 3 days to plan, 3 days to prepare." Rafael looked at his companions. "This is going to be different from the way station. Alejandro's smarter than his brother. He won't fall for the same tricks. We'll need to be perfect." They burned the bodies where they lay, not out of respect but out of practicality. Let the desert and the scavengers claim them. Then they rode back to the mining camp, each lost in their own thoughts about what came next. That night, Rafael couldn't sleep despite his exhaustion. He sat outside the shack watching stars wheel across the black sky, thinking about the path that had brought him here. 2 months ago, he'd been a rancher with a family and a future. Now he was a killer with nothing but a list of names and the will to cross them out. Sarah found him there sometime after midnight. She sat beside him without speaking, offering silent companionship. Finally, she broke the silence. "Dutch told me something earlier. About revenge." "What did he say?" "That revenge is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. That it consumes you from the inside until there's nothing left but bitterness and hate." She paused. "But he also said that sometimes, when the evil is great enough, when justice is impossible through normal means, revenge becomes necessary. That some debts can only be paid in blood." Rafael considered this. "Which does he think this is?" "Both. He thinks you're destroying yourself, but he also thinks the Mendozas need to be destroyed. That the territory will never be free until they're gone." Sarah turned to look at him. "What do you think?" "I think it doesn't matter what I think. I think I set something in motion that can't be stopped now. Even if I wanted to walk away, which I don't, Alejandro would hunt me down. The only way forward is through. And after. If you survive killing Alejandro, if you actually manage to end this, what then?" Rafael had been asking himself the same question. He had no answer. His entire existence had contracted to a single point: destroy the Mendozas. Beyond that, there was nothing but void. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe there is no after for me. Maybe this is all I have left." Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, her grip surprisingly strong. "Then find something, because a life lived only for revenge isn't a life at all. It's just a slow death with extra steps." They sat together in silence after that, 2 damaged souls seeking warmth in a cold universe. Eventually, Sarah went inside to sleep, but Rafael remained, keeping vigil with the stars and his ghosts. The next 3 days passed in intense preparation. They studied the mine's layout, gathered from Sarah's reconnaissance and the documents taken from Carlos's men. The operation was extensive, tunnels running deep into the mountainside, surface structures for processing ore, housing for the workers. Alejandro would be inspecting the yields, checking the books, ensuring maximum profit extraction. Rafael developed a plan that was simpler than the way station ambush, but potentially more effective. No explosives, no elaborate traps, just patience, position, and a single perfect shot. He would set up on a ridge overlooking the mine, wait for Alejandro to emerge from his inspection, and put a bullet through his brain from 400 yards away. Clean, efficient, final. Dutch argued for a more complex approach, something with contingencies and escape routes, But Raphael had moved past caution. He was tired of planning, tired of waiting, tired of carrying the weight of his grief and rage. He wanted this finished. On the morning of the 1st, Raphael rode out alone despite protests from Dutch and Sarah. This was his kill, his responsibility, his final payment on a debt written in his family's blood. They'd helped him reach this point, but the ending belonged to him. He reached the ridge overlooking the mine by mid-morning and settled into position among the rocks. The mine sprawled below, workers moving like ants through the various structures. Raphael set up his rifle carefully, checking the wind, calculating the range, preparing for a shot that had to be perfect. Hours passed. The sun climbed to its zenith, beat down with merciless intensity, began its descent toward evening. Raphael didn't move except to occasionally sip water from his canteen. His entire being had contracted to the scope of his rifle, to the small circle of magnified vision through which he watched the mine. Finally, just after 3 in the afternoon, a group of riders appeared from the south. 10 men on horseback, moving with the careful watchfulness of professional security. In their center rode a man in fine clothes, his bearing suggesting authority and intelligence. Alejandro Mendoza. Raphael watched through his scope as the group dismounted, as Alejandro conferred with the mine foreman as they disappeared into the administrative building. He waited with the patience of stone, knowing they'd emerge eventually, knowing his moment would come. An hour later, they exited the building. Alejandro was speaking animatedly with the foreman, gesturing toward the processing equipment. His security detail had relaxed slightly, their vigilance dulled by the routine nature of the inspection. Raphael centered the crosshairs on Alejandro's chest. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. The shot was clear, the conditions perfect. One squeeze and it would be over. The debt paid. The promise fulfilled. But something made him hesitate. Not mercy, not doubt, just a need to make sure Alejandro knew who was killing him and why. Carlos had known in his final moments. Raphael had seen the recognition in his eyes. Alejandro deserved the same awareness. Raphael stood from cover, fully visible on the ridge. He was too far away for Alejandro to see his face clearly, but the rifle was unmistakable. A man with a gun, positioned to kill. The security detail reacted instantly, shouting warnings, surrounding Alejandro, weapons drawn. But Raphael didn't fire. He simply stood there, letting Alejandro see him, letting the moment stretch. Then one of the guards did something unexpected. Instead of taking cover, he stepped directly in front of Alejandro, using his body as a shield. A loyal man, or perhaps just well-trained. Either way, he'd made himself the obstacle between Raphael and his target. Raphael could shoot through him. The bullet would likely pass through the guard and still hit Alejandro. But something about the guard's stance, protective, selfless, willing to die for his employer, resonated with a part of Raphael that still remembered being human. This wasn't the guard's debt. This was Alejandro's. Raphael lowered his rifle slightly, waiting to see what Alejandro would do. The smart move would be to retreat immediately, to use the distraction to escape. But Alejandro surprised him. The Mendoza brother pushed his guard aside and stepped forward, staring up at the ridge where Raphael stood. Even at 400 yards, Raphael could see the calculation in his posture, the intelligence working behind his eyes. "Cortez!" Alejandro's voice carried across the distance, aided by the natural acoustics of the canyon. "Rafael Cortez! I know it's you, my brother's killer!" Raphael said nothing, just kept his rifle trained in Alejandro's general direction. "You want to kill me? Fine. But not like this, not hiding on a ridge like a coward." Alejandro spread his arms wide. "Come down here, face me. Let's end this properly." It was bait. Obviously bait. Alejandro was trying to draw Raphael into the open where his guards could surround him, overwhelm him with numbers. A transparent ploy that only an idiot would fall for. Raphael started down the ridge. He moved carefully, keeping his rifle ready, watching for any sign of ambush. But Alejandro seemed to be keeping his word. He ordered his guards to fall back, creating an open space between the mine buildings. A dueling ground. As Raphael approached, he got his first clear look at Alejandro Mendoza. The man was smaller than his brother, perhaps 50 years old, with gray threading through his dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He wore his wealth casually, fine clothes, expensive boots, a pistol with an ornate grip that probably cost more than Raphael's entire ranch had been worth. "So you're the ghost that's been haunting us," Alejandro said as Raphael stopped 30 feet away. "The one who turned my brother against Rodriguez, who stole our money and gave it to peasants, who killed Carlos and 16 of our best men." He studied Raphael with genuine curiosity. "I expected someone bigger, more impressive. You look like a half-dead rancher." "I am a half-dead rancher," Raphael replied. "You made me that way." "Ah, yes, your family. The regrettable incident that started all this." Alejandro's tone was almost sympathetic. "For what it's worth, I didn't order their deaths. That was Carlos being Carlos, brutal and short-sighted. I would have handled it differently." "How? You would have killed me too?" "No, I would have bought you out, offered you enough money to start over somewhere else. Made it seem like your idea to sell." Alejandro smiled thinly. "Violence should be a last resort, not a first option. My brother never understood that." "But you profited from his violence. You built your empire on it." "True. I'm not claiming innocence. I knew what Carlos was, what he did. I used his brutality when it served my purposes." Alejandro shrugged. "But I'm a pragmatist, Cortez. I recognize when a strategy has failed. Killing your family was a mistake. It created you, and you've cost me more in 2 months than you and your land were ever worth." Raphael felt anger stirring in the cold place where his emotions used to live. "Is that supposed to be an apology? An explanation?" "It's an observation and an offer." Alejandro's voice took on a different quality, persuasive, reasonable. "You've proven yourself formidable, intelligent, ruthless when necessary. Those are qualities I value. Work for me. Help me rebuild what you've destroyed. I'll pay you more than you could make in 10 lifetimes of ranching. I'll give you power, resources, protection. All I ask is that you redirect your considerable talents toward productive purposes instead of destructive ones." The offer hung in the air between them. Raphael stared at Alejandro, trying to understand if this was a genuine proposition or just another ploy. "You want me to work for the man whose organization killed my family. I want you to stop wasting your life on vengeance that won't bring them back. Your wife and children are dead, Cortez. Nothing changes that. But you're alive. You could have a future, purpose. Or you can kill me here and then spend the rest of your short life running from the 100 men who'll come looking for revenge." Alejandro's eyes were intense, compelling. "I'm offering you a way out, a chance to turn this tragedy into something meaningful." For just a moment, Raphael felt the seductive pull of the offer. A way to stop, to rest, to find purpose in something other than death and destruction, to rebuild instead of demolish. Then he remembered Miguel's face as bullets tore through him, Carmen and Tomas holding hands as they died, Elena's eyes going empty as her blood soaked the earth. "No," Raphael said simply. "No? Just like that? You won't even consider—" "No," Raphael repeated. "You think this is about rationality? About making the smart choice? This stopped being about logic the moment Vega rode onto my land. You're right that killing you won't bring my family back, but it will balance the scales. It will prove that some crimes carry consequences no amount of power can prevent." Alejandro's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool, and you'll die a fool's death." "Everyone dies. At least my death will mean something." "Will it?" Alejandro's hand moved toward his ornate pistol. "Or will it just be another nameless grave in an uncaring desert, forgotten within a generation?" "Let's find out." They drew simultaneously, both men fast despite their different builds and ages. Raphael's shot came first by perhaps 1/10 of a second. He saw Alejandro's chest explode in a spray of red, saw the man stumble backward, saw the light fade from those intelligent eyes. But Alejandro's shot had also found its mark. Raphael felt the bullet punch into his side, felt his legs go weak, felt himself falling as blood spread hot and wet across his shirt. He hit the ground hard, his vision graying at the edges. Through the growing darkness, he saw Alejandro's guards rushing forward, saw them surrounding their fallen employer, saw them turning toward him with weapons drawn. This was it then. The ending he'd always known was coming. He'd killed Alejandro, settled the debt, fulfilled the promise. Now the desert would claim him, just as it had claimed his family, his old life, everything he'd once been. Raphael tried to raise his rifle for one final shot, but his arms wouldn't cooperate. The world was fading, sounds becoming distant and strange. He thought of Elena, of his children, wondered if he'd see them again in whatever lay beyond. Then gunfire erupted from a new direction. The guards surrounding Alejandro began falling, shot from behind by unseen attackers. Through his fading consciousness, Raphael heard Dutch's voice, harsh and commanding. "Get him up! Sarah, cover us! Move, move!" Hands grabbed Raphael, lifted him roughly. Pain shot through his body, sharp enough to cut through the growing numbness. He felt himself being thrown across a saddle, felt Storm's familiar gait as the horse began to run. "Stay with us, son." Dutch's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Don't you dare die now! Not after everything!" But the darkness was too strong, too seductive. Raphael let it pull him down, surrendering to the void that had been waiting for him since the night his world burned. His last conscious thought was a simple one. It's finished. Then nothing. Pain dragged Raphael back to consciousness like fishhooks in his flesh. He surfaced from the darkness in fragments, aware first of agony in his side, then of voices speaking in urgent whispers, then of rough blankets beneath him and the smell of wood smoke and antiseptic. "He's waking up," Sarah's voice tight with strain. "About time." Dutch, gruff but relieved. "Thought we might lose him there for a while." Raphael forced his eyes open. The ceiling of the mining camp shack swam into focus above him, rough planks blurring and sharpening as his vision adjusted. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Sarah appeared in his field of vision, her face drawn with exhaustion, and lifted his head gently to pour water between his lips. "Easy," she murmured. "Small sips." The water was cool and sweet. Raphael drank greedily, then regretted it as his stomach lurched. He turned his head and retched, bringing up nothing but bile. Sarah supported him through it with practiced efficiency, then eased him back down. "How long?" Raphael managed to rasp. 4 days, Dutch said, moving into view. The old man looked like he'd aged a decade, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot. "You've been in and out, mostly out. Fever broke yesterday, which is why we figured you might actually survive." Raphael's hand moved to his side, feeling thick bandages wrapped around his torso. The wound throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to joining his family. "Alejandro." "Dead," Sarah confirmed. "Your shot killed him before he hit the ground. We saw it happen." "You weren't supposed to be there. I told you." "You told us a lot of things," Dutch interrupted. "We ignored most of them. You really think we were going to let you ride to your death alone? We followed at a distance. When we saw Alejandro's men about to execute you, we intervened." He paused. "Killed 6 of them before the rest scattered. They were too shocked by losing both Mendoza brothers to mount an organized response." Raphael closed his eyes, processing this. He'd achieved what he set out to do, both Mendoza brothers dead, their empire shattered. But the cost kept mounting. Dutch and Sarah had risked everything, killed men on his behalf, tied themselves irrevocably to his war. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never wanted to drag you into this, into killing." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You didn't drag us anywhere we didn't choose to go. We knew the risks. We took them willingly." Her expression softened slightly. "Besides, someone had to save your stubborn hide. You were too busy trying to get yourself killed to think about what came after." "There wasn't supposed to be an after." "Well, there is," Dutch said firmly. "So you better figure out what to do with it." Over the next week, as Raphael slowly healed, they gathered intelligence about the aftermath of the Mendoza brothers' deaths. Sarah made careful trips to San Marco, returning with news that painted a picture of an organization in complete collapse. "It's chaos," she reported on the 3rd day. "Without the brothers, everyone's scrambling for control. Black Tom Miller tried to declare himself the new boss. La Vibra shot him in the street. Then someone killed La Vibra. Now there's at least 4 different factions fighting over the scraps." "What about the people?" "The regular citizens," Raphael asked. "Mixed reactions. Some are celebrating, treating it like Liberation Day. Others are terrified. They know violence abhors a vacuum, and right now San Marco's one big vacuum waiting to be filled. Sarah paused. But there's something else, something you should hear. She pulled out a crumpled newspaper, the San Marco Weekly Ledger, dated 3 days prior. The headline read, "Reign of Terror Ends, Mendoza Brothers Dead." But it was the subheading that caught Raphael's attention. Mystery Vigilante Sparks. Hope for New Era. He read the article with growing disbelief. It painted him as a folk hero, a lone warrior who'd stood against tyranny when no one else would. It credited him with liberating the territory from criminal oppression. It called him a symbol of resistance and justice. "This is wrong," Raphael said, his voice hollow. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who wanted revenge." "Maybe that's what you started as," Dutch said carefully. "But that's not what you became. Whether you meant to or not, you gave people hope. You proved the Mendozas weren't invincible. That changed something fundamental in how people see the world." "I don't want to be a symbol. I don't want any of this." "Doesn't matter what you want," Sarah said bluntly. "You opened a door. Now people are walking through it. The question is whether you're going to help guide them or just walk away." Raphael had no answer for that. He'd been so focused on revenge, on crossing names off his list, that he'd never considered what came after. Now the list was complete. Vega, Delgado, Reyes, Cardenas, Cruz, Carlos, Alejandro, all dead, and he felt more lost than ever. By the second week, Raphael could walk without assistance, though his side still throbbed with every step. Dutch declared him fit enough to make decisions, which meant it was time to figure out what those decisions should be. "The way I see it, you got 3 choices," Dutch said one evening as they sat around the fire. "First option, disappear. Change your name, head west or south. Start over somewhere nobody knows you. It's the safest play." "Second option?" Raphael asked. "Stay in the territory but keep your head down. Live quiet. Don't make waves. Let the legend of the mysterious vigilante fade while you rebuild some kind of normal life." "And the third?" Dutch exchanged a glance with Sarah before answering. "Step into the light. Acknowledge what you did and help clean up the mess it created. San Marco needs leadership, needs someone to help establish real law and order before another tyrant fills the void." Raphael stared into the fire, watching flames dance and consume the wood. "I'm not a leader. I'm a killer." "You're a man who did what needed doing," Sarah corrected. "And right now the territory needs someone who isn't afraid to do hard things, someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Whether you like it or not, that's you." "What about you two? What do you want?" Dutch smiled sadly. "I'm an old man, Raphael. I want to spend whatever time I got left watching something grow instead of watching things die. If you stay, if you help build something real here, that'd be a fine thing to see before I go." Sarah's answer was simpler. "I want the men who killed my father to know they didn't win. I want to see this territory become what it could be, instead of what they made it, and I think you're the one who can make that happen." Their faith in him felt like a weight, pressing down with the same inexorable force as the grief and rage that had driven him this far. But beneath the weight, Raphael felt something else stirring, something he hadn't experienced in months. Not hope exactly, but maybe the distant possibility of it. "If I stay," he said slowly, "I'm not doing it as some hero or symbol. I'm just a man trying to make things right, trying to honor my family by building something they would have been proud of." "That's all anyone can ask," Dutch said quietly. The next morning, Raphael asked Sarah to take him to his old ranch. He'd been avoiding it, unable to face the ruins and the memories. But if he was going to move forward, he needed to make peace with the past. They rode out just after dawn, Storm carrying Raphael with patient care. The journey took most of the day, Raphael's healing wounds forcing them to travel slowly. As the sun began its descent, familiar landmarks appeared. The cottonwood grove, the dry creek bed, the rise where his property began. Then the ruins came into view. Raphael had expected devastation, and devastation is what he found. The house was gone, reduced to a blackened foundation and scattered debris. The barn was a skeleton of charred timber. Everything he'd built with his own hands had been erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. But the graves remained. Someone had tended them in his absence. The mounds were neat, marked with simple wooden crosses. Wildflowers grew around them. Whether planted deliberately or simply allowed to flourish, Raphael couldn't tell. It transformed the space from a scene of tragedy into something closer to a memorial. "I came here a few times while you were recovering," Sarah admitted. "Pulled the weeds, said a few words. Seemed wrong to leave them untended." Raphael dismounted carefully and walked to Elena's grave. The simple cross bore her name, carved in letters he didn't recognize. He knelt slowly, ignoring the protest from his wounded side, and placed his hand on the earth. "I did it," he said quietly. "Everyone who hurt you, everyone responsible, they're gone. The debt's paid." He paused, searching for more words. "I know that doesn't bring you back, doesn't change anything that matters, but it's all I could give you." The wind whispered through the cottonwood grove, carrying scents of sage and dust. Raphael moved to his children's graves, kneeling at each one, speaking to them as if they could hear. He told Miguel about the ambushes, the tactical decisions that would have fascinated his eldest son. He told Carmen about Sarah's bravery, about how women could be just as fierce as men. He told Tomas about Storm, about the long rides through the desert, about how his father had become someone he probably wouldn't recognize. When he finally stood, the sun was setting, painting the sky in those familiar shades of copper and gold. Sarah had kept her distance, giving him privacy, but now she approached slowly. "What will you do with this land?" she asked. Raphael looked around at the ruins, at the graves, at the empty space where his life used to be. "Leave it as it is, a reminder of what was lost and why it mattered." He turned to face her. "But I won't live here. Can't. Too many ghosts." "Where then? San Marco, I suppose. If I'm going to help rebuild, I should be where the work needs doing." They rode back to the mining camp as darkness fell, arriving well after midnight. Dutch was waiting up, his face creased with concern until he saw them safely returned. "Well?" the old man asked. "We go to San Marco," Raphael said. "Tomorrow, all three of us. Time to face whatever comes next." They entered San Marco at midday, riding down the main street with no attempt at concealment. Raphael sat tall on Storm despite his healing wounds, his rifle visible in its saddle scabbard. Dutch and Sarah flanked him, their own weapons equally apparent. They looked like what they were, hardened survivors who'd been through hell and emerged on the other side. People stopped and stared. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Raphael heard his name repeated, saw recognition dawn on face after face. The mysterious vigilante, the ghost who'd toppled the Mendozas, riding into town in broad daylight. "Where's the sheriff's office?" Raphael asked a man standing outside the general store. The man pointed wordlessly down the street, his eyes wide with something between fear and awe. They found Sheriff Dawson behind his desk, older and grayer than Raphael remembered from descriptions, his face carrying the deep lines of a man who'd compromised himself one too many times. He looked up as they entered, and whatever color remained in his weathered cheeks drained away completely. "Rafael Cortez," Dawson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're supposed to be dead." "A lot of people made that mistake." Raphael pulled out a chair and sat without being invited, his side throbbing but his expression betraying nothing. "We need to talk about the future of San Marco." "I don't have any authority over you. The Mendozas are dead, their organization's fractured. You're the elected sheriff," Raphael interrupted. "Corrupt, compromised, complicit in everything the Mendozas did, but still elected. Which means you have a choice to make right now." Dawson's hand moved toward the desk drawer where he presumably kept a weapon. Dutch's rifle rose smoothly, its barrel pointing directly at the sheriff's chest. "I wouldn't," Dutch said mildly. Dawson froze. "What do you want?" "I want you to start doing the job you were elected to do," Raphael said. "Round up the remaining Mendoza enforcers. Anyone who committed violence, who brutalized citizens, who operated outside the law. You're going to arrest them, charge them, and hold proper trials." "On what authority?" "The territorial judge is in the Mendoza's pocket. The whole system was, Sarah corrected, was in their pocket. Things are different now, and if the current judge won't cooperate, we'll petition for a new one. Someone clean, someone who can't be bought." Dawson looked between the three of them, calculation warring with fear in his expression. "And if I refuse? Then we'll find someone else to wear that badge," Raphael said quietly. "Someone who understands that law and justice aren't the same thing as power and oppression. Your choice, Sheriff, redemption or replacement." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Dawson sagged in his chair, the last remnants of his false authority draining away. "What guarantees do I have that you won't just shoot me once I'm no longer useful?" "You have my word," Raphael said, "which is worth more than any promise the Mendozas ever made. Do the job right, and you get to keep it. Do it wrong, and you lose the badge, but keep your life. That's more mercy than you showed the people of this town." Dawson nodded slowly. "All right, where do we start?" Over the next month, San Marco transformed. Sheriff Dawson, operating under Raphael's watchful eye, arrested 19 former Mendoza enforcers. The territorial governor, responding to petitions from citizens who'd finally found their courage, appointed a new judge, a stern woman from the capital with a reputation for incorruptibility. Trials were held. Some men were hanged. Others were sentenced to hard labor. A few, whose crimes were lesser or whose coercion could be proven, were released with warnings. Raphael attended every trial, sitting in the back of the makeshift courtroom, his presence a silent reminder of why justice mattered. He didn't testify, didn't need to. Everyone knew who he was, what he'd done, why it had been necessary. But he also made sure justice didn't become vengeance. When a mob formed to lynch 2 former Mendoza men before their trials, Raphael stood between the crowd and the prisoners, his rifle in hand, and spoke in a voice that carried across the angry masses. "We're not them," he said. "We don't execute people without trial, without evidence, without giving them a chance to speak in their own defense. That's what the Mendozas did. If we do the same, then all this suffering was for nothing. We'll have just replaced one tyranny with another." The mob dispersed. The trials proceeded fairly. And slowly, painfully, San Marco began to remember what it meant to be civilized. Dutch threw himself into helping rebuild the town's economic infrastructure. He worked with miners to establish fair wage standards, helped merchants organize against price gouging, and used his decades of frontier experience to mediate disputes. His age and wisdom made him a natural peacemaker, someone both sides of any argument could trust. Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, by becoming an advocate for the territory's women and children. She organized a school, recruited a teacher from back east, and established a fund to help widows and orphans left behind by the violence. Her experiences, losing her father, fighting alongside Raphael, proving herself as capable as any man, gave her a unique authority that transcended traditional gender roles. And Raphael found himself in the strangest position of all, reluctant leader of a community trying to rebuild itself from ruins. He didn't want the role, actively resisted it at first, but people kept coming to him with problems, questions, requests for guidance. He was the man who'd beaten the unbeatable enemy. That gave him credibility nothing else could match. He bought a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just a simple structure with a bedroom, a main room, and a small stable for Storm. He spent his days mediating disputes, his evenings reading by lamplight, and his nights staring at the ceiling and wondering if Elena would recognize the man he'd become. 6 weeks after entering San Marco, Raphael was walking back from a meeting with the town council when he heard running footsteps behind him. He turned, hand moving instinctively toward his pistol, to find a young boy of perhaps 8 years old racing toward him with a look of desperate urgency. "Mr. Cortez! Mr. Cortez!" the boy gasped. "You gotta come quick! There's men at the Rodriguez place, and they're saying they're taking over his old gambling operation, and Mrs. Rodriguez is trying to stop them, and—" Raphael didn't wait to hear more. He ran toward the Rodriguez house, ignoring the stabbing pain in his still-healing side. The house came into view, a modest structure on the south side of town, surrounded by 4 rough-looking men on horseback. A middle-aged woman stood in the doorway, holding a rifle with shaking hands, her face pale but determined. "This is my home now!" she was shouting. "My husband's dead, and I'm not letting you take what he left behind." One of the men laughed. "Your husband was a criminal, lady. His property's forfeit. We're just claiming what's rightfully—" "Nobody's claiming anything," Raphael said, his voice cutting through the confrontation like a knife. The 4 men turned toward him. Raphael recognized the type immediately. Opportunists, drifters who'd heard about the power vacuum and come to carve out their own piece of territory. Not Mendoza men, just common criminals seeing an opening. "This doesn't concern you, friend," the leader said, though his hand moved toward his gun. "Everything in San Marco concerns me." Raphael walked forward slowly, his own hand resting on his pistol grip. "Now you gentlemen have two choices. Mount up and ride out of town peacefully, or stay and find out what happened to the last group of men who tried to intimidate citizens." The threat was implicit, but clear. The leader studied Raphael with narrowed eyes, calculation plain across his weathered features. "You're Cortez, the one who killed the Mendoza brothers." "That's right." "And you're protecting Rodriguez's widow?" "Rodriguez worked for the Mendozas, ran their gambling operations. He was as dirty as they come." "Maybe he was," Raphael acknowledged. "But he's dead now, and his crimes died with him. His widow's innocent. This is her home, and you're trespassing." The tension stretched like piano wire pulled to breaking point. Raphael watched the leader's eyes, reading the calculation happening behind them. 4 against 1 seemed like good odds. But reputation had weight, and Raphael's reputation had been written in the blood of men who'd underestimated him. Finally, the leader nodded slowly. "All right, Cortez, we're leaving, but you can't protect everyone forever. Sooner or later, someone's going to test you. And when they do, I'll handle it the same way I handled the Mendozas," Raphael said quietly. "However many come, I'll be ready. That's a promise." The 4 men rode away, their departure watched by a growing crowd of townspeople who'd gathered at the sound of confrontation. Raphael turned to Mrs. Rodriguez, who was still clutching her rifle with white-knuckled hands. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I didn't know what else to do. The house is all I have left, and those men, they're gone now, and they won't be back." Raphael looked at the crowd. "But Mrs. Rodriguez brings up a good point. We can't rely on me being everywhere at once. We need to organize, form a citizens' watch, make it clear that this town protects its own." An older man stepped forward from the crowd. "You talking about forming a militia, Cortez?" "I'm talking about people taking responsibility for their own safety and their neighbors. The Mendozas kept you afraid and dependent. That ends now. You want to be free? Then be free. Stand together, look out for each other, stop waiting for someone else to solve your problems." The crowd murmured, some voices supportive, others uncertain. Raphael saw the challenge clearly. They'd spent so long being oppressed that they'd forgotten how to be independent. Relearning that would take time, but time was something they finally had. That evening, Raphael sat with Dutch and Sarah in the small house he'd purchased. They shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, eating in comfortable silence until Sarah finally spoke. "You're good at this," she said. "Leading, organizing, giving people direction." "I'm adequate at it," Raphael corrected. "There's a difference. You're better than adequate. The town trusts you, listens to you. You could really build something here." Raphael set down his fork, his appetite fading. "I don't want to build an empire, Sarah. I've seen what empires do, how they corrupt people." "Not an empire," Dutch said. "Just a community. A place where people can live without fear. Isn't that what you wanted for your family? What you had before the Mendozas destroyed it?" The question hit harder than Raphael expected. He'd been so focused on revenge, on destruction, that he'd almost forgotten what he'd been fighting to protect. Elena had wanted safety, opportunity for their children, a place where hard work mattered more than violence. Everything the Mendozas had represented the opposite of. "If I do this, if I really commit to helping rebuild San Marco, it can't be about me," Raphael said slowly. Can't be about one man making decisions for everyone else. That's how tyranny starts. We need proper governance, elected officials, laws that apply equally to everyone. "Agreed," Sarah said. "But in the meantime, while we're establishing those structures, the town needs someone to look up to, someone who embodies what we're trying to become." "And you think that's me? A killer who spent the last 3 months executing people?" "I think that's exactly why it should be you," Dutch said firmly, "because you know the cost of violence. You've paid it personally. You won't make decisions about using force lightly because you understand the weight of those decisions. That's the kind of leader this territory needs. Raphael wanted to argue, to insist they were wrong about him. But looking at their faces, Dutch's weathered certainty, Sarah's fierce conviction, he recognized that refusing would be its own form of selfishness. They'd risked everything to help him achieve his revenge. The least he could do was help them build something positive from the ashes. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll stay. I'll help. But on one condition, this is temporary. We establish proper governance as quickly as possible, then I step back. I'm not meant to be a permanent leader, just a placeholder until something better can grow." Sarah smiled. "Deal." The months that followed were among the strangest of Raphael's life. He'd spent so long focused on death that learning to focus on life felt alien, uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's clothes, but gradually, almost against his will, he found purpose in the work. San Marcos Town Council, now composed of elected citizens rather than Mendoza appointees, met weekly to address community needs. Raphael attended every meeting, contributing when asked but trying not to dominate. He watched with satisfaction as people who'd been silent for years found their voices, began proposing solutions, started taking ownership of their community's future. The territory's new judge proved as incorruptible as her reputation suggested. She held court regularly, settling disputes with fairness that seemed almost revolutionary after years of corrupt rulings. When she sentenced a former Mendoza enforcer to hang for multiple murders, the execution was carried out legally, witnessed by citizens, recorded in official documents. Justice, not vengeance. Dutch's economic reforms began bearing fruit. Miners received fair wages, merchants competed honestly. A lending system was established to help people rebuild businesses destroyed during the Mendoza years. The territory's economy, which had been little more than extraction and exploitation, began to diversify and strengthen. Sarah's school opened 3 months after the Mendoza brothers' deaths. 23 children attended the first day, their ages ranging from 6 to 14. Raphael donated money for books and supplies, and watched with an emotion he couldn't quite name as those children learned to read, to write, to imagine futures beyond mere survival. But the work wasn't without setbacks. Twice more, groups of opportunists tried to fill the power vacuum, and twice Raphael had to demonstrate that San Marco was no longer open to exploitation. He killed 3 men in those confrontations, clean, necessary violence that left him hollow but resolute. The territory was healing, but healing required protection until it grew strong enough to protect itself. 7 months after Alejandro's death, Raphael was repairing a fence at the edge of his property when Sarah rode up on her horse. Her expression was troubled, which immediately put Raphael on alert. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Remember Vicente Cruz, one of the men from the raid on your ranch?" Raphael's blood went cold. Cruz had been one of the 7 who'd murdered his family. "He's supposed to be dead. I thought we got all of them. He wasn't at the way station when we killed Carlos. Turns out he'd been sent to oversee a distant mining operation. When news of the brothers' deaths reached him, he ran. Been hiding out in the territories." Sarah paused. "He just turned himself in to Sheriff Dawson. Says he wants to confess, face trial, accept punishment for what he did." Raphael's hands tightened on the fence post he was holding. Cruz. The last name on his list, the final thread connecting him to that terrible night. After all this time, finally within reach. "Where is he now?" Raphael's voice came out flat, dangerous. "In a cell. Dawson's holding him for trial next week." Sarah studied Raphael's face. "What are you going to do?" Raphael didn't answer. He finished securing the fence post, gathered his tools, and walked back to his house. Sarah followed, her concern evident but unspoken. Inside, Raphael cleaned his pistol with mechanical precision, his mind working through possibilities. He could walk into that jail right now and shoot Cruz through the bars, claim justice, vengeance, closure. No one would stop him. The town would probably support it. But that wasn't what they'd built here. That wasn't what Elena would have wanted. That wasn't what his children had died for. "Raphael," Sarah said softly. "Talk to me." "He killed my children," Raphael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Put them against a wall and shot them while they cried for me. I heard their screams. I watched them die. And now he wants to confess, to face trial. Like that somehow makes it right?" "I know, but..." But nothing! Raphael set down the pistol, his hand shaking with suppressed rage. Every fiber of my being wants to walk into that jail and tear him apart with my bare hands, to make him suffer the way my family suffered, to finish what I started. But you won't, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Raphael looked at her, this fierce young woman who'd become something like family over these violent months. Why are you so certain? Because you're not that man anymore. You were, maybe. But you've spent 7 months building instead of destroying. You've shown this territory that justice and law matter. If you kill Cruz now, you'll be throwing all of that away, proving that beneath the civilized veneer, you're still just a killer. Maybe that's all I'll ever be. Maybe. Or maybe you're something more. Someone who understands that true strength isn't about revenge. It's about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Sarah moved closer. Let the law handle Cruz. Let him face a proper trial. Let justice be done the right way. Not for him, he deserves whatever he gets. But for you. For the person you're trying to become. Raphael wanted to reject her words, to cling to the rage that had sustained him through the darkest period of his life. But he couldn't. Because she was right. He'd built something here in San Marco. Something fragile, but real. Destroying Cruz outside the law would undermine everything. I want to testify, Raphael said finally. At the trial. I want to look him in the face and tell everyone exactly what he did. Make sure there's no question about his guilt. You can do that, Sarah agreed. Dutch and I will be there with you. The trial took place in San Marco's largest building, a former warehouse converted into a makeshift courthouse. Every seat was filled, people packed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Vicente Cruz sat at the defendant's table, his face gaunt and haunted, his eyes refusing to meet Raphael's steady gaze. The new judge, Judge Margaret Thornton, called the court to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. She was a severe woman in her 50s, her expression carved from granite, her reputation for fairness matched only by her reputation for harshness toward the guilty. Vicente Cruz, she intoned, you stand accused of murder, arson, and conspiracy in the attack on the Cortez Ranch 7 months ago. How do you plead? Cruz stood on shaking legs. Guilty, Your Honor, to all charges. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Thornton's expression didn't change. The court acknowledges your plea. However, given the severity of the charges, we will hear testimony to establish the full extent of your crimes. Mr. Cortez, please approach. Raphael walked to the witness stand, his heart pounding but his expression calm. He placed his hand on the Bible, a formality he endured despite his shattered faith, and swore to tell the truth. Then he told it, all of it. The 7 riders arriving at his ranch, the hospitality offered, the betrayal, the violence. He described watching his wife die, his children slaughtered, his home burned. His voice remained steady throughout, though his hands gripped the witness stand's rail hard enough to turn his knuckles white. And Mr. Cruz's specific role? Judge Thornton asked. He helped line my children against the barn wall, Raphael said, the words tasting like ashes. Carmen was 7 years old. Tomas was 6. They were holding hands, crying. Cruz raised his rifle and his voice broke. He paused, gathered himself. He executed them. On Antonio Vega's orders, on Carlos Mendoza's authority, but his finger was on the trigger. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Several people were crying. Cruz had his head bowed, tears streaming down his face. Why? Raphael asked, looking directly at Cruz for the first time. Why turn yourself in now? Why confess after all this time? Cruz looked up, his face a mask of anguish. Because I can't live with it anymore. I see their faces every night, hear their screams. I tried to run, tried to drink it away, tried to forget. But I can't. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I need this to end. Need to face what I did. Do you want to die? Raphael asked bluntly. Yes. More than anything. Death would be mercy compared to living with this. Raphael nodded slowly, understanding finally crystallizing. Then death is too easy for you. You want an end to suffering? That's the coward's way out. Real justice would be you spending the rest of your life making amends, helping build instead of destroy, living with what you did while trying to balance the scales. Judge Thornton leaned forward. Are you suggesting a sentence, Mr. Cortez? I'm suggesting that killing Cruz satisfies my need for revenge but doesn't honor my family's memory. They'd want something better to come from their deaths than just another corpse. Raphael looked at the judge. Hard labor, life sentence. Put him to work building roads, schools, whatever this territory needs. Make him contribute something positive with whatever years he has left. That seems more just than a quick drop and a short stop. The courtroom erupted in argument, some voices supporting Raphael's proposal, others demanding Cruz hang. Judge Thornton gavelled for silence, her expression thoughtful. This court will recess for 1 hour while I consider the appropriate sentence, she announced. Bailiff, return the prisoner to his cell. Dutch found Raphael outside the courthouse, standing in the shade and trying to process what he'd just done. That took courage, the old man said, advocating for the man who killed your children. Most people wouldn't have that in them. Most people would be right to hang him, Raphael replied. Maybe I'm just being stupid, weak. No, you're being wise, understanding that the cycle of violence has to end somewhere, and it might as well end with you. Dutch put a hand on Raphael's shoulder. Elena would be proud. Raphael wanted to believe that, wanted to think his dead wife would approve of mercy over vengeance, but he'd never know for certain. The dead kept their opinions to themselves. Judge Thornton returned after an hour and delivered her verdict, guilty on all counts, sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor, to be served in the territorial work camps. Cruz accepted the sentence without protest, his expression suggesting he'd have preferred hanging but understood why it was denied him. As the bailiff led Cruz away, the condemned man paused beside Raphael's seat. Thank you, Cruz said quietly, for giving me a chance to do something right. I know it doesn't change anything, but thank you. Raphael said nothing. There were no words adequate to the moment. Cruz moved on, and Raphael sat in the emptying courtroom, feeling something shift inside his chest. Not forgiveness. He'd never forgive what was done to his family, but maybe something close to peace. The understanding that revenge had been necessary to stop the Mendozas, but mercy was what would let him live with himself afterward. Sarah appeared beside him as the last spectators filed out. Ready to go home? Yeah, Raphael said, standing slowly. Let's go home. The year anniversary of his family's death arrived with spring wildflowers blooming across the desert. Raphael rode out to his old ranch alone, carrying a bundle of those same wildflowers. The ruins remained untouched. He'd declared the land off limits to development, a permanent memorial to what was lost. He spent the morning tending the graves, clearing winter debris, ensuring the wooden crosses remained straight and strong. Then he sat in the shade of the cottonwood grove, remembering. He remembered Elena's laugh, the way she'd touched his face when he was worried, her fierce love for their children. He remembered Miguel's earnest questions about everything, his desire to learn, to understand, to be a good man like his father. He remembered Carmen's gentle spirit, the way she'd cared for injured animals, her dreams of becoming a teacher someday. He remembered Tomas's boundless energy, his fearlessness, his absolute trust that Papa would always protect him. He'd failed that trust, failed to protect them. But maybe, in some small way, he'd honored it by ensuring no other families in the territory would suffer the same fate. I'm trying to be someone you'd recognize, Raphael said aloud, speaking to the graves. Not the man I was. He died with you, but not the killer I became either. Something in between. Someone who understands darkness, but chooses light when he can. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sage. Raphael sat until sunset, then mounted Storm and rode back toward San Marco. The town had grown in the past year. New buildings lined the main street. The school had expanded to accommodate 40 students. Dutch's economic reforms had attracted legitimate businesses, a proper bank, a telegraph office, even a small newspaper that published weekly accounts of territorial progress. The darkness of the Mendoza years was fading, replaced by something that resembled hope. Raphael's house sat on the edge of town, modest but comfortable. He'd added a small garden in back where he grew vegetables Elena would have approved of. Storm grazed in a paddock beside the house, well-fed and content. It wasn't the life Raphael had planned, but it was a life. That counted for something. Sarah and Dutch came for dinner that evening, as they did most evenings. They'd become the closest thing to family Raphael had left. Sarah had matured over the past year, her grief over her father transforming into fierce determination to build the territory he'd dreamed of. Dutch had grown frailer, his years finally catching up with him, but his mind remained sharp and his commitment unwavering. The territorial governor's coming next month, Sarah announced over dinner. Wants to personally assess the progress we've made. Might even establish San Marco as the new territorial capital if things continue improving. That would bring more people, more opportunity, Dutch observed. Also more potential for the kind of corruption we just got rid of. Then we stay vigilant, Raphael said. Make sure the systems we've built are strong enough to resist corruption. That's the work of a generation, not a year. You planning to be around for that generation? Sarah asked carefully. Raphael had been thinking about that question a lot lately, about whether he'd stay in San Marco or eventually move on, whether his purpose here was temporary or permanent. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me still thinks about leaving. Starting over somewhere, nobody knows what I've done, who I've been. But another part recognizes that I'm needed here, at least for now. You're always going to be needed somewhere, Dutch said gently. Question is whether you're running towards something or away from something. Running away never works. I tried it for years after my son died. All you do is carry the grief with you. Running toward something, though, toward purpose, toward building, toward making a difference, that can heal in ways revenge never could. Raphael absorbed this wisdom, recognizing its truth. He'd spent months running toward revenge, and while it had been necessary, it had also hollowed him out. The past year of building, of helping San Marco heal and grow, had begun filling that hollow space with something other than rage. I'll stay, he said finally, at least until the territory's stable, until the systems we're building can function without me. After that, he shrugged. We'll see. Sarah smiled. That's good enough. 2 years after the Mendoza brothers' deaths, San Marco held its first fully democratic election for town council. 7 candidates ran for 5 seats, and the campaign was spirited but civil. Raphael declined to run despite numerous requests, insisting that his role was temporary leadership during crisis, not permanent governance. The election results reflected the territory's transformation. Winners included a former miner, a school teacher, a merchant, a rancher, and a woman who'd lost her husband to Mendoza violence, but refused to let grief define her. Diverse voices, united by commitment to fairness and justice. Raphael attended the winners' swearing-in ceremony with satisfaction. This was what he'd fought for. Not power for himself, but the ability of regular people to control their own destinies. The Mendozas had stolen that from the territory. Now it was being reclaimed. Sheriff Dawson, who'd proven himself capable of redemption, if not heroism, approached Raphael after the ceremony. Guess this means you'll be moving on soon, Dawson said, now that the town can manage itself. Maybe, Raphael replied. Haven't decided yet. For what it's worth, I hope you stay. You're a good influence. Remind people what integrity looks like. Dawson paused, and I wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance to do better, to be better. Not many people would have. Raphael nodded, accepting the thanks awkwardly. He'd never been comfortable with gratitude or recognition. He'd done what needed doing, nothing more. But as he walked home that evening, watching the sun set over a town that was healing, he felt something unexpected, contentment. Not happiness, that might never return fully, but contentment, the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd made a difference. That his family's deaths, while meaningless in themselves, had sparked changes that improved countless lives. Dutch passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months after the election. He was 75 years old, and according to the doctor, his heart simply stopped during the night. Sarah found him the next morning, peaceful and still, a half-finished letter to an old friend on the table beside him. The funeral drew hundreds of people. Miners he'd helped organize, merchants he'd advised, families he'd supported during the hardest times. Raphael delivered the eulogy, speaking about Dutch's wisdom, his courage in standing against tyranny despite his age, his vision for what the territory could become. Dutch told me once that he wanted to spend his final years watching something grow instead of watching things die, Raphael said to the assembled mourners. Look around you. Look at this town, this territory, these people. He got his wish. Everything we've built, every improvement we've made, carries his fingerprints. His legacy isn't in monuments or buildings. It's in the lives he touched and the community he helped create. They buried Dutch on a hillside overlooking San Marco, where he could eternally watch over the town he'd helped save. Raphael stood by the grave long after the other mourners left, remembering conversations around campfires, tactical planning in the mining shack, the old man's steady presence during the darkest times. Thank you, Raphael said simply, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself, for showing me that destruction alone isn't strength, that building something requires more courage than tearing things down. Sarah stood beside him, tears tracking down her face. He loved you like a son, she said quietly. Told me once that helping you gave him purpose again, made his last years mean something. He gave me more than I gave him, Raphael replied. He gave me a reason to keep living when I was ready to die. Gave me a path forward when I could only see revenge. They walked back to town together, united in grief but also in determination to honor Dutch's memory by continuing the work he'd believed in. 5 years after his family's death, Raphael stood at the opening ceremony for San Marco's new courthouse, a proper stone building that symbolized the territory's commitment to law and justice. Judge Thornton presided over the dedication, her stern face betraying a hint of satisfaction as she declared the building open. This courthouse represents our territory's transformation, she announced to the gathered crowd, from lawlessness to law, from tyranny to democracy, from fear to hope. Let it stand as a reminder that justice, true justice, is worth fighting for and worth building. Raphael watched from the back of the crowd, anonymous among the citizens. He'd declined multiple invitations to speak, to be recognized, to accept accolades. That wasn't who he was or wanted to be. He was just a man who'd done what needed doing, then tried to make something positive from the ashes. Sarah found him after the ceremony. She was engaged now, to a merchant who'd moved to San Marco 2 years prior, a good man who treated her with respect and shared her vision for the territory's future. The wedding was planned for autumn. You should have spoken, she said. People wanted to hear from you. They don't need to hear from me. The courthouse speaks for itself. Raphael looked at the solid building, the American flag flying above it, the stream of citizens entering to marvel at the facilities. This is what matters. Not who I am or what I did, but what we built together. Are you finally going to tell me if you're staying or leaving? Sarah asked. Because I'd like to know if you'll be at my wedding. Raphael smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually stoic face. I'll be at your wedding, and after that we'll see. I've been here 5 years. The territory's stable. Maybe it's time for me to find out who Rafael Cortez can be when he's not defined by tragedy. Where would you go? West, maybe. There's still frontier out there, still places that need building. Or maybe I'll just find a quiet piece of land and raise horses. Live simply. Try to remember what peace feels like. Sarah hugged him, something she rarely did. Whatever you choose, thank you. For everything. For saving this territory. For showing me what strength really means. For being the father I lost when mine died. Raphael returned the embrace, this fierce young woman who'd become family. Thank you for saving me. For reminding me that revenge isn't an ending, it's just a transition to whatever comes next. That night, Raphael sat on his porch, watching stars emerge across the darkening sky. Storm grazed nearby, old now but still strong. The sounds of San Marco drifted on the evening breeze, children playing, couples talking, the normal sounds of a functioning community. He thought about Elena and his children, as he did every night. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed from an open wound into a scar, permanent but bearable. They were gone, but they lived on in his memory, in the choices he made, in the territory he'd helped build in their honor. Vicente Cruz was still alive, laboring in the work camps, contributing what little he could to balance his cosmic debt. The surviving Mendoza enforcers were scattered, some dead, some imprisoned, some fled to distant territories. The organization that had terrorized the region was dust, its power broken beyond recovery. And San Marco thrived. Schools taught children, courts delivered justice, elections empowered citizens. The economy grew honestly. People lived without fear, built futures, dreamed dreams that actually had a chance of coming true. Raphael had achieved what he set out to do. The debt was paid, the promise fulfilled. His family's deaths hadn't been meaningless. They'd sparked a transformation that freed an entire territory from tyranny. Now, finally, he could consider what came next. Not as a grieving husband seeking revenge, not as a reluctant leader holding civilization together, but as Rafael Cortez, a man with a past he couldn't change, but a future still unwritten. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. The desert stretched away in all directions, beautiful and harsh, and eternally itself. And Raphael sat between earth and sky, no longer entirely either the man he'd been or the killer he'd become, but something new, tempered by loss, strengthened by purpose, learning slowly to live instead of merely surviving. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities. But tonight, for the first time in 5 long years, Rafael Cortez felt something approaching peace. The war was over. The battle won. The territory saved. And the man who'd lost everything had, against all odds, found a reason to keep living, not in revenge, but in the simple, quiet knowledge that some things, once broken, can be rebuilt stronger than before. He rose from his chair, walked to the edge of his property, and looked toward the north where his family's graves rested under the cottonwoods. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and sage, the eternal perfume of the frontier. "I did it," he said softly. "Made them pay. Made something better rise from the ashes. I hope that's enough. I hope you can rest now." The wind whispered no answer, but Raphael didn't need one. He'd done what he could. The rest was silence and memory and the long, slow work of learning to forgive himself. He turned back toward his house, toward Storm waiting patiently, toward the life still ahead of him. The past would always be part of him, but it no longer owned him completely. Rafael Cortez walked into his future, scarred but unbroken, carrying the weight of his dead with quiet dignity and the faint, fragile hope that redemption, however imperfect, was still possible. The frontier had tested him with fire and loss. He'd survived. And in surviving, had proven that even in the harshest, most unforgiving landscape, one determined soul could change everything. The story was finished, but the life, that continued, and that finally was enough.